Have you ever longed for perfect stillness so intensely that you mistook calm for safety? Imagine standing in a valley where not a single leaf stirs, where the air feels like velvet against your skin, and the sky hangs motionless overhead. Your heartbeat slows, your muscles uncoil, and for a fleeting moment you believe nothing can touch you here. But what if that serene silence isn't protection at all, but an invitation to lower your guard? When you begin to crave peace, above all else, you slip into a mental trap. You start to believe that the absence of conflict equals the presence of security. You stop questioning, stop probing, stop pushing back against the currents that shape your world. Peace becomes a seductive lullaby, coaxing you into passivity with soft melodies and gentle rhythms until you forget how to resist. Consider how this plays out in your closest relationships. Perhaps you've stayed silent when a friend crossed a boundary, because raising your voice felt like igniting a fire you didn't want. Maybe you've swallowed your doubts when a partner's apologies always resumed the calm, even though you felt a twist of guilt or fear in your gut. Calm becomes the currency you trade your honesty for, and every unwritten truth is a brick laid in the wall between who you are and who you pretend to be. In the workplace, the same quiet pact is often brokered. A boss might praise your willingness to avoid drama or reward your ability to agree with every decision. You learn that conformity ensures harmony and conflict invites consequences. So you hold your tongue when ideas deserve scrutiny, you nod when decisions feel wrong, and you convince yourself that your silence is noble. But in truth, that silence is the soil in which complacency grows. History provides its own warnings. You've heard of appeasement, of leaders who sacrificed principle in exchange for a shaky calm. You've read how early concessions paved the way for greater aggression, how each treaty inked in the name of peace emboldened the next act of violence. Those lessons are not relics of a distant past. They echo in every moment you choose stillness over scrutiny, quiet over challenge, ease over effort. Look at nature for confirmation. A stagnant pond may appear serene, its surface reflecting the sky with glassy perfection. Yet, beneath that mirror lies decay, algae blooms, toxins, and suffocating gases that choke every living creature. Only moving water can cleanse itself, only flowing streams can support life. In the same way, your mind needs friction, your spirit needs resistance, your world needs the push and pull of conflicting forces to stay healthy. The comfort of peace numbs your senses to creeping injustices. When unrest bubbles quietly in another corner of your life, you rationalize it as a minor ripple, not worth disturbing the larger pond. You tell yourself that, as long as your own bubble remains unbroken, nothing requires your attention. But that bubble can burst without warning, and the forces you ignored will flood your world. Silence is sold to you as a virtue. You're praised for keeping the peace, lauded for your calm demeanor, admired for your ability to walk away. Yet every time you choose peace over principle, you step further away from your own truth. You teach the world that your voice can be silenced without consequence, that your boundaries are negotiable, and that you will yield for the sake of serenity. And society itself leverages this instinct. Systems promise order in exchange for obedience, offering routine, predictability, and the illusion of safety. They tell you that asking too many questions will disrupt the equilibrium, that stability is more valuable than justice or progress. So you settle into the comfort of clarity, never recognizing the chains disguised as guarantees. True security, however, demands vigilance. Authentic peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of balance. It requires active engagement, continuous negotiation, and the courage to speak up when something feels wrong. Peace that arises from surrender is no peace at all, it is weakness clothed in harmony. Recognizing this trap is your first act of resistance. It means unlearning the lie that silence equals safety, challenging the belief that conflict is always destructive, and understanding that discomfort can be a signal rather than a threat. When you accept that strength often looks like tension, that growth often feels like struggle, you begin to reclaim genuine peace, one forged in the crucible of confrontation, not in the comfort of complacency. Peace means weakness when it means surrendering your voice, your doubt, and your will. But the moment you break that illusion, you step into a peace that both honors your boundaries and challenges your complacency. And only then can you stand unshaken, ready to face whatever storms may come. Soon you'll witness how words wrapped in warmth can hide knives poised to strike. You feel the weight of those words before you even register them. You're so talented. No one understands you like I do. You always see the truth. Compliments wash over you like sunlight through a window, gentle and inviting. But what if each ray is a blade disguised in gold? What if every flattering whisper is carefully designed to blind you to the knife at your back? You remember the last time someone did this to you? They told you how special you were, how your ideas sparkled brighter than any star. You believed them. You let your guard down, pressed close, eager for warmth. And then, when you were at your most vulnerable, they took what was yours, your trust, your confidence, even your identity, and walked away, leaving you with an empty echo that still haunts your quiet moments. Compliments feel good. They taste like honey on your tongue, sticky and impossible to spit out. They smooth over your insecurities and polish the rough edges you hide from the world. You lean into them, breathe in the affirmation, crave more of the sweetness. But beneath that honey hides a subtle poison, a betrayal waiting to bloom in the dark corners of your mind. Have you ever paused to wonder why words of praise can feel more intimate than a confession of love? Because flattery is a secret language spoken in the spaces between your defenses. Each kind remark is a tiny surrender, a silent agreement that you are safe. And when safety arrives, you stop watching. You trust. You lower the barricades you've built to protect your heart. Think of compliments as the key to your fortress. The friend who tells you how indispensable you are, the colleague who exalts your skill, the lover who calls you their greatest treasure, all of them offer you the key first. You turn the lock yourself. You invite them in, and only once they stand inside do you realize the door is a trap, snapping shut behind them, locking your doubts outside. Compliments mask betrayal because betrayal thrives on trust. It cannot walk in under harsh light or loud alarms. It prefers the hush of whispered praise, the soft tread of words chosen to soothe. It seeks out the places in your heart, left soft by longing, warmed by desire for acceptance. And there, in that vulnerable space, betrayal plants its seed. You tell yourself you are immune. You believe you can spot manipulation a mile away. But compliments are camouflage. They are the leaf that hides the predator, the velvet glove that conceals a surgeon's scalpel. Your mind registers the warmth, your body relaxes, your skepticism drifts away. And only after betrayal strikes do you question which words were sincere and which were laced with intent. Perhaps the most dangerous betrayals are the ones you wanted to believe. You gave your loyalty freely because the praise felt so true, so timely. You spoke of shared dreams, of building empires together, of conquering the world side by side, and you believed. You believed in the promise of unity, in the warmth of mutual admiration. And yet, behind those shared dreams, behind those shining visions, lay a plan to usurp, to abandon, to stab you in the back. What's left in the aftermath of such betrayal? You sift through memories, seeking moments that might have been warnings, small flickers, reluctant compliments, hesitation in their eyes. But the past is a haze, and your pain becomes the lens through which you view every kind word. Now, when praise arrives, it tastes bitter. You question each syllable, searching for the concealed edges. But don't be so quick to condemn every compliment. Some are pure, given freely, without strings or schemes. The danger lies when praise becomes currency, used to buy your trust, to barter for control. It's the transactional compliment that masquerades as affection, the strategic flattery that conceals the dagger poised behind your spine. Look around you. Notice the tone, the timing, the sudden flurry of admiration that appears right before a request or demand. Compliments in that context are seldom innocent. They are preludes to betrayal, the opening chord in a symphony of manipulation. And only when the dissonance crescendos do you realize the harmony was false all along. The sting of betrayal leaves scars deeper than any physical wound. You learn to armor yourself with skepticism, to measure praise with suspicion, to guard your heart against the siren song of flattery. But armor is heavy. It weighs you down, isolates you from genuine connection. You trade warmth for safety, love for doubt. So how do you move forward? You learn to discern the difference between kindness and camouflage. You listen not just to the words spoken, but to the silence behind them. You watch for shadows that linger after the light of praise fades. You honor your instincts when they whisper that something feels off, even if you cannot name why. And remember, betrayal is not a reflection of your weakness. It is a mirror held up to another's character. When someone uses compliments as a weapon, it reveals their cruelty, not your credulity. The fault lies with the one who wields flattery like a blade, not with the one who once believed. Trust is a fragile gift. It cannot be built on hollow praise or manufactured devotion. It demands time, honesty, shared struggle, and genuine respect. When someone's compliments are rooted in those elements, they are gifts, blessings even. But when praise is nothing more than bait, you must see the line drawn in the sand and step back before you cross it. Walk away when the honeycoats begin to harden into chains. Step back when your praise becomes someone else's power over you. And cherish the rare voices that speak truth plainly, without adornment, without hidden agendas. They are the beacons in a world where compliments so often mask betrayal. When you learn to see through the gleam of flattery, you regain your freedom. You reclaim your ability to love without fear, to trust with discernment, to give and receive praise without losing yourself. And in that space, true connections flourish, unmasked, unguarded, real. Soon you'll discover how the echoes of past pain can loop endlessly beneath your every thought. Have you ever woken in the stillness of night to find your own thoughts invading you, dragging you back into a memory you thought you had left behind? You lie there, heart pounding, as the same scene replays, one you'd give anything to rewrite. The face of the person who betrayed you, the sting of words you wish you could unsay. You feel the ache in your chest, the tight knot in your stomach. And you know, before sleep can even return, that this loop will carry on, whether you want it to or not. Every painful memory has a way of turning into a broken record, looping endlessly in your mind. Rumination isn't just remembering, it's reliving. It's playing back the worst moments on repeat, each replay sharpening the edges of your hurt, making the wound feel fresh all over again. Your mind becomes a trap, a dark theatre where the show never ends, and the fear that you'll never escape grows louder with every act. Imagine a conversation that went horribly wrong, an argument, a misunderstanding, a moment when words you wished you could swallow spilled out anyway. You replay that scene at work, in line at the supermarket, and even when you finally sit down to eat. The words echo in your head over and over until they drown out everything else. You wonder what would happen if you could pause the tape, fast forward to forgiveness, or rewind to choose different words. Yet you are powerless to change what's already been etched into your mind. There's a reason these loops feel impossible to break. Neural pathways strengthen every time you traverse them, wiring your brain to return to familiar pain. It's like a path through a dense forest. The more your feet follow it, the clearer it becomes, until finding a new route feels inconceivable. Your brain, tuned for survival, magnifies negativity. Why remember the feast when the famine stalked you? Evolution's design now works against you, keeping you stuck in a cycle where suffering feels safer than moving on. And it's not just mental. Your body responds as if the threat is happening now, flooding you with the same stress hormones you felt at the worst moment. Your palms sweat, your heart races, your breath catches. You become hostage to an enemy that lives inside you. This isn't imagination, it's a biological response, a memory so vivid your body cannot tell past pain from present danger. Triggers lurk everywhere, a song on the radio, a scent carried by the breeze, a phrase overheard in a crowded room. You believe you're safe, convinced you've moved on, until a stray stimulus pulls you back, and you fall into the same hole you climbed out of yesterday. The loop doesn't care about your schedule or your plans. It strikes when you least expect it, and once you're inside, getting out feels like climbing a ladder made of smoke. You tell yourself you'll conquer these memories. You practice mantras, seek distractions, even pour your heart into journaling. For a moment, you taste victory, but then doubt seeps in. You wonder if you're weak, if everyone else has already left these painful pasts behind. Look around. Silent suffering thrives because we normalize this self-punishment. We believe that enduring the endless replay is proof of strength. But true strength lies not in replaying pain, but in learning to press stop. Breaking the loop demands more than willpower. It requires rewiring your mind, mindfulness to notice the spiral before it gains momentum. Cognitive reframing to challenge the script your mind insists is unchangeable, truth and connection. So you're not alone with the echoes of yesterday. Therapy helps, yes, but so do simple acts of self-compassion, recognizing that you are not defined by what happened to you, but by the choices you make next. Real transformation often comes in tiny moments, a breath taken when the scream in your head demands release, a gentle reminder that this thought is not a prophecy, but a passing cloud. Gradually, you learn that you can observe your pain without merging with it. You treat each haunting memory like a visitor you invite in for a short chat before gently showing it the door. In time, the darkness loses its grip, and the past begins to lose its power. But beware complacency. These loops can return when you least expect them. Every moment you choose to confront or distract defines your freedom. As you start to reclaim those looping pathways, you'll discover that the most powerful tool against endless pain is the decision to live in the present, moment by moment. What happens when the paralysis of indecision traps you in an even darker loop, freezing every choice you've ever made in place? Your mind flickers like a malfunctioning traffic light, casting red and green flashes at your thoughts without warning, trapping you at the junction of your own possibilities. You feel the tension in your chest when every road seems both inviting and terrifying at once. Indecision freezes every choice because when you overanalyze, options multiply into an army too vast to charge at. You stand paralyzed, an observer watching your life slip past, wondering how a moment that should be simple becomes impossibly complex. When you picture those roads, you see one lined with comfort and familiarity, another paved with growth and challenge, a narrow trail that promises adventure. All roads extend into mist, and when outcomes blur, you hesitate. Breathing feels harder, like you're carrying invisible weights. You imagine turning left or right, but the image dissolves before your eyes. The crossroads becomes a cage, each potential step echoing as a thunderclap of anxiety you cannot outrun, cannot quiet. This is paralysis by analysis, a mental trap that feeds on your need for certainty. You gather facts, weigh pros and cons, consult friends, revisit old advice. But facts breed more facts, and advice spawns new doubts. Every new insight fans the flame of hesitation. You become a prisoner of your own reasoning, chained to theoretical maps of a terrain you have never explored. Worse, you mistake complexity for impossibility, believing that if you cannot know everything, you must know nothing. Even mundane decisions chip away at your resolve. What will you eat for breakfast? What shirt will you wear? These trivial choices, repeated dozens of times each day, erode your mental energy. By midday, you face decision fatigue, a state where even minor choices feel unbearable. The avalanche of small decisions carries the same weight as life or death in your mind. Coffee order becomes a battle. Traffic route becomes an existential crisis. The mind built to decide falls apart under the sheer volume of choice. Consider the story of a brilliant painter who spent years perfecting her work before ever showing it. She added brushstroke after brushstroke, corrected and refined, fearful of rejection. She intended to wait until her art was flawless, unaware that perfect never arrives. Meanwhile, her peers launched shows, received critiques, learned and evolved. She watched the art world pass by like a swift river, comfortable on the bank, but forever frozen by the fear of not being ready. Look at supermarket aisles bursting with brands, streaming menus overflowing with titles, career paths branching endlessly. Each additional option feels like a spring that must be compressed before release. You stand scanning labels, scrolling on your phone, trapped by the illusion that more choice equals better choice. In reality, more options only amplify your uncertainty. The abundance meant to empower you becomes the very force that immobilizes you. As time ticks on, guilt settles in, guilt for time wasted, guilt for letting opportunities slip, guilt for failing to live up to your own expectations. You imagine a future self, frustrated and resentful, taking photographs of your indecision as evidence. Regret spreads like a shadow, silent but ever present. Every moment spent hesitating carves regret deeper into your mind, leaving indelible marks you carry into every tomorrow. Neuroscience calls it the freeze response. When faced with threat or uncertainty, your brain locks up, flooding your system with cortisol. Fight and flight are useless when the enemy is not a predator but the specter of bad choices. So your body resorts to freezing. It's a survival tactic that once saved your ancestors from danger, but now betrays you when the threat is abstract. You freeze when you should move, and every frozen moment feels like a defeat. And once your confidence frays, you look outward for answers. You seek mentors, search for frameworks, memorize decision trees. Yet no one can hand you certainty on a silver platter. Advice only highlights options. It cannot relieve the fear that lingers in your gut. You begin to believe that if you cannot make a perfect choice, you should make none. The external compass breaks when you need an internal one. Freedom comes with a single decision. It might be tiny, it might be flawed, but making any choice unfastens a link in the chain of doubt. You break the ice by moving. You learn through trial and error, discovering what works and what doesn't. Small victories build momentum. Choosing to take a walk, to send a text, to write a word, they all whisper that you can decide, you can act, you can trust your own judgment, even if imperfect. Mistakes become your greatest instructors. A wrong job teaches you what you genuinely value. A stumbled relationship reveals boundaries you never knew existed. A misstep in your budget shows you where priorities lie. Each mistake sculpts your path, chiseling away the excess until only the core remains. Clarity emerges not from endless thought experiments, but from the lived reality of trial, error, and adjustment. Remember that indecision is its own decision. It chooses stagnation over progress, safety over growth. It guarantees disappointment by default, because doing nothing carries its own consequences. No outcome is as certain as the steady erosion of hope that results when you let fear dictate your choices. And hope is fragile. Left unattended, it withers at the first sign of doubt. To escape this trap, embrace uncertainty as a companion rather than a threat. Invite it to the table. Treat discomfort as curiosity's signal, not a warning flare. When you feel the weight of choice crushing you, whisper to yourself that courage is simply moving in spite of fear. Let every decision be a statement of your intent to shape your life, rather than a plea for external permission. Every path you take rewrites your story. Indecision freezes time, but choice ignites possibility. You are not at the mercy of options, you are the director of your own narrative. Even trembling limbs can carry you forward. Your mind will soon reveal how memories twist and bend, shielding you from the harsh sting of regret. Picture yourself lying awake at 2 a.m., replaying a single conversation in your mind. Every word echoes, every pause feels deliberate. You're convinced you remember the laughter, the tone, the exact moment their voice cracked. It's a memory etched in your soul, or so you think. But what if that recollection is not an exact recording, but a story your mind rewrote to ease the sting of regret? What if your brain is not a faithful archivist, but a cunning editor, pruning details that wound too deeply? You clutch onto that memory as evidence of who you are, as proof that you meant well. But memory is not a crystal-clear photograph. It's clay in the hands of your own psyche. Each recall reshapes it, smoothing the jagged edges. When guilt gathers, your mind suppresses the sharper pain, polishing the memory until it glows with self-justification. You remember the kindness, the good intentions, and conveniently forget the moments of hesitation or harshness. Psychologists call this the self-serving bias. Your memories tilt toward narratives that protect your self-image, bending facts until they align with the story you want to believe. Blank spaces are filled with assumptions that soften regret. Conversations you wish you'd handled better suddenly end differently. Your mind stitches in apologies you never made, revising history to spare you the weight of remorse. The process is unconscious. Every time you revisit an event, you reconstruct it, not retrieve it. Neurons fire, synapses rewire, and the new version becomes the new truth. It's not the past that's unreliable, it's your recollection of it. This reconstructive nature of memory means that the more you dwell on a painful moment, the farther it drifts from what really happened. Imagine you snapped at a friend during an argument. You replay that outburst until your heart twists with shame. But the next morning, when you look back, you recall more of their anger than your own. You remember how hurt they looked, how your words seemed to pierce them. Your mind amplifies their pain to justify your actions. You weren't wrong, you reason. They provoked you. Regret dissolves into righteous defense. You even savor the memory of their tears, using it as proof that your instinct was right, while forgetting how their eyes once glistened with forgiveness after you finally apologized. Later, perhaps years later, you recount the story to someone else. Each retelling builds on the last, layering your own spin. Friends nod in sympathy, unaware that the version they hear is a half-truth. You've rewritten history in your favor so many times that your brain no longer distinguishes between fact and fiction. The false narrative feels as real as any genuine memory. Neuroscience reveals that every recall triggers a window of vulnerability, a moment when memories can be altered. This reconsolidation strengthens the edited version. Like a sculptor chiseling away marble, you carve regret from the stone until only a monument to your innocence remains. The painful details vanish, replaced by a narrative that comforts instead of condemning. But there's a cost. By shielding yourself from regret, you rob yourself of growth. Regret is a signal, a compass pointing toward what matters. When you erase its sting, you lose the lessons hidden in your mistakes. You wander forward, blind to the traps you nearly fell into, doomed to repeat the same missteps until memory finally breaks under the weight of denial. Without confronting genuine regret, you wander through life carrying an illusion of integrity. Sometimes memories resist this editing. They burst forth in nightmares or flashbacks, raw and unfiltered. In those moments, you glimpse the unvarnished truth, your own shortcomings, the sharp edges you tried so hard to smooth. Your heart pounds, and you realize how far your memories have veered off course. The real horror isn't the distorted past, it's recognizing just how deeply you've deceived yourself. The urgent desire to feel better overrides the drive to remember accurately. Your mind erects walls around shame, building a fortress of altered recollections. It's a mental trap, comfort now at the price of authentic self-awareness. You trade painful truth for a pleasant illusion, never seeing how those twisted memories shape your choices, relationships, and sense of self. What if you could pry open those walls? What if you examined your memories with unflinching honesty? You'd uncover truths you've buried, instances where you hurt others, choices you regret, moments you could have acted differently. That excavation would hurt more than any edited recollection, but it might finally free you from the cycle of remorse and self-deception. It's terrifying to face the unedited footage of your own life, but within that fear lies the power to evolve. Understanding that your memories bend is the first step toward genuine growth. Accepting that your recollections are fluid, malleable, subject to bias, means you can choose to question them. You can seek corroboration, revisit the facts, listen to other perspectives. In doing so, you reclaim ownership of your past. You no longer let an edited narrative dictate who you believe yourself to be. And while you believe your memories have protected you from regret's sting, the mind's next deception is already taking shape, false intentions ready to sow seeds of doubt. You shake hands with someone who praises your work, but later you catch yourself replaying every word they said, searching for hidden meaning. That smile felt too wide, that compliment too precise. You can almost feel an invisible hook sinking in, twisting satisfaction into suspicion. It's like you're reading a script only you can see, where every line has a second purpose, and every gesture hides a whisper of betrayal. False intentions start as small seeds. A gift handed over with an extra flourish. A quick apology that lingers in your mind. Beneath the surface, motives fold in on themselves, shaped by self-interest or hidden agendas. At first they feel like kindness, until doubt wraps around your thoughts. You begin to question the sincerity of every gesture. The simplest act of goodwill transforms into a puzzle where the answer slips away just when you need it. Trust battles doubt in your head. Your instincts tug you toward connection, toward believing in the best version of people. But your mind pushes back, pointing out every inconsistency, every hesitation, every unnatural pause. You feel caught in a tug of war inside your own skull. When intentions are pure, trust flows freely. But when those intentions hide something darker, doubt swells until you can't remember who you wanted to believe or why. Have you ever accepted praise only to wake up hours later with a knot in your stomach? Have you sent a polite reply to an invitation, then found yourself dissecting every syllable of the host's tone? That quiet pressure inside, urging you to look twice, is your mind's alarm bell. It goes off because somewhere, deep down, you sense that what's being presented to you is not the whole story. Think of false intentions as a beautifully wrapped package with no return address. You're drawn in by the ribbon and the promise inside, but the moment you untie the bow, the contents shift. The edges blur. You realize the gift was never for you. It was a lure designed to pull you closer, to obscure warning signs with glittering distraction. And now you're left clutching empty paper, wondering how you ever fell for the trick. In the workplace, a manager showers you with praise for volunteering extra hours, only to assign you the next impossible deadline. In friendship, someone listens to your problems, then uses your vulnerabilities as ammunition when you disagree. On social media, an influencer offers free advice, then sells you a product you don't need. Each scenario spins trust into a web of obligation and confusion. You're trapped, entangled in promises built on sand. Emotionally, this torture feels like a quiet drip of anxiety leaking into every moment. You start scanning expressions for hidden cues. You catch yourself hesitating before saying yes to dinner. You replay conversations late into the night, searching for clues you missed. Sleep becomes restless. Your thoughts move like shadows across a wall, always shifting, never resting. Dread settles in, dull and constant, until you begin to doubt even your own good intentions. This constant suspicion reshapes your world. You shrink in relationships, build walls instead of bridges. You second-guess every kind impulse, every generous offer from others. False intentions taste like poison in your mouth, and you swallow bitterness just to survive. You become a fortress, wary of every approach. Ironically, the fear that others might deceive you leads you to blind yourself to genuine care and sincerity. But what if you could see behind the mask? What if you learned to spot the micro-expressions, the fleeting cracks in the performance? What if doubt became a tool instead of a trap? You could measure words against actions, test the waters before diving in, and hold a mirror up to people's promises. The power shifts when you refuse to accept anything at face value, when you demand not just words, but evidence of intent. You start by listening to that inner voice that whispers warnings. You ask clarifying questions instead of nodding blindly. When someone offers help, you set boundaries. If they truly want to give, they won't flinch at specifics. You watch for patterns rather than isolated moments. You learn that sincerity doesn't need rehearsed lines. It's consistent, patient, and willing to face scrutiny. With each genuine exchange, you rebuild a sense of trust, brick by brick. And yet, reclaiming trust doesn't mean abandoning caution. It means balancing openness with vigilance. You embrace curiosity about why someone cares, what they stand to gain, and how their actions align with their words. You give yourself permission to walk away when doubt becomes too loud, to protect your boundaries even when it feels harsh. Every time you choose clarity over comfort, you weaken the power of false intentions to engineer your emotions. False intentions breed doubt, yes, but doubt can be your shield. It can teach you to see deception before it takes root. Every cautious step becomes a lesson, every wary glance a guard against betrayal. Instead of a prison, doubt can become a fortress of clarity, where only genuine motives are welcome. And as you move through the world armed with skepticism and empathy, you transform fear into insight, suspicion into strength, and uncertainty into awareness. Next, discover how fixating on every terrible possibility pulls you under like an anchor you can never escape. Imagine lying in bed, eyes wide open, your mind racing through every possible disaster that could strike before sunrise. You feel the weight of your heartbeat in your throat as visions flood in, your phone dying when you need help, your partner walking out without a word, the roof collapsing in a storm you never saw coming. Each scenario is more vivid than the last, more terrifying, more convincing. And in that moment, you believe these are the only possibilities, that the worst case is not just probable, but inevitable. Your mind seizes on that bleak horizon and locks it into place. Worst-case scenarios become anchors, dragging down every other thought with their gravitational pull. You start every decision from that point of ruin. Should you send the email? What if they hate your words and blacklist you forever? Should you leave the house? What if a random stranger ambushes you on the sidewalk? The simple act of breathing becomes an exercise in navigating potential catastrophe. It's not paranoia. It's a cognitive trap that most people fall into without even realizing it. Anchoring bias normally applies to numbers. First digits we see skew our estimates. But it works just as powerfully on emotions. The first, most horrifying picture your mind paints becomes the lens through which you view reality. Every new piece of data is forced to conform to that grim template. A minor problem suddenly seems like the prelude to total collapse because your brain has been trained to seek confirmation of its darkest fantasies. Think about planning for a work presentation. If you anchor on forgetting your lines and witnessing the room erupt in laughter, you'll rehearse with trembling hands, afraid to glance at the audience. Your confidence unravels before you even speak a word. Or picture a friend who anchors on the idea that a simple text reply could set off a fight, so every pause in conversation becomes proof of betrayal. Relationships strain under the weight of these imagined disasters because worst-case anchors aren't thoughts you can negotiate with. They're emotional truths. Anchoring on doom isn't harmless. It hijacks your stress response, flooding your body with adrenaline and cortisol as if you're facing an actual threat. Your heart races, your muscles tighten, sleep retreats into the distance. Over time, that constant state of high alert changes the very architecture of your brain, making you more likely to default to fear. Comfort becomes a distant memory. You start to crave that adrenaline rush, even though it exhausts you, because at least it feels like purposeful action. Yet, worst-case anchors don't protect you, they paralyze you. Because once you've convinced yourself that disaster is imminent, every option seems risky. You play small, you hesitate, you avoid new experiences, fearing they might trigger the collapse you've already rehearsed in your mind. A simple invitation to lunch turns into a debate over whether the ride will end in an accident. A career opportunity becomes a potential trapdoor. You're living inside a siege mentality of your own making. Imagine Sarah, who spent weeks planning a hiking trip but anchored on the image of a bear attack, dissolving her plans into gore. She checked the weather obsessively, packed twice the supplies she needed, and still refused to set foot on the trail. Her friends tried to reassure her, but nothing could dislodge that initial, horrifying mental picture. So she cancelled. Later, when they shared photos of tranquil streams and wildflower meadows, she felt a stab of regret that turned into guilt. She'd let the anchor of her worst case drag her from an experience she might have loved. Anchors can be reset, but the process demands deliberate effort. First, you must recognize the moment your thoughts slip into catastrophic mode. Catch the racing mind at the starting line. Notice the story you're telling yourself, the looming collapse, the irrevocable mistake, the unforgivable loss. Then gently challenge it. Ask, how likely is this really? Has something similar ever happened? What evidence do I have? This isn't about forcing false optimism. It's about introducing nuance. Next, re-anchor your perspective with a more balanced scenario. Picture the same situation unfolding with minor setbacks, manageable complications, or even positive surprises. Imagine forgetting a line, but recovering with a joke. Envision asking a friend to clarify and finding they value your honesty. Visualize the worst storm passing without a leak. These new anchors won't feel as thrilling as the apocalyptic ones, but they'll ground you in reality rather than fear. Repetition is key. Each time you notice the mind reaching for catastrophe, pause and rehearse a more realistic outcome. Over days and weeks, you'll build new neural pathways. The anchor of doom will lose its grip. Decision-making will become clearer. Risk will feel measured instead of paralyzing. You'll still glimpse the dark horizon, but it won't be your only horizon. Worst-case anchors reveal something essential about your mind. It prioritizes survival over thriving. It overestimates threats and underestimates opportunities because it evolved in a world of immediate dangers. Today, most threats are far less visceral than the ones our ancestors faced. Yet the brain hasn't caught up. So it seizes on catastrophic imaginings as if they were real, deadly predators lurking in the shadows. Learning to recognize and reset these anchors is an act of courage. It means facing the fear that your mind has stitched into your identity. It demands you step out before the anchor is lifted, to walk on the trail, send the email, make the phone call. Each small step chips away at the power of worst-case scenarios. And you begin to see that life isn't a constant storm. It's a series of moments, many of which won't unfold the way your mind predicted. The real freedom comes when you acknowledge that the mind's worst case is just a story, a vivid, persuasive story, but not an inevitable one. When you loosen the anchor, you reclaim your ability to act, to explore, to believe in possibilities beyond fear. Then you find that most catastrophes you imagined could be met with resilience, support, and even unexpected grace. But what happens when the fear you swear by dresses itself as clarity, masquerading as insight? Have you ever felt that moment when dread sharpened into a blade of insight, and suddenly you believed you could see the truth in every shadow? Anxiety has this seductive trick. It pretends to be your ally, whispering that every uneasy thought is a revelation. You sit at the edge of your bed, mind racing with possibilities, convinced that your nervous heartbeats are the drums of discovery. But what if this clarity is just a disguise? When anxiety strikes, it turns ordinary details into ominous signals. A colleague's delayed reply becomes proof of a looming betrayal. A stray comment transforms into a secret judgment. Your mind, fueled by adrenaline, scours the landscape of your life for faults, patterns, and hidden threats. It convinces you that you're unraveling mysteries, but you're really weaving a labyrinth of your own making. Picture your brain as an overzealous detective. It insists on connecting dots that don't belong together, mapping conspiracies in casual glances. You become vigilant, convinced that each minor slip, an overlooked email or an unreturned call, is part of a grand design. You trust these anxious conclusions because they feel urgent and important, as though ignoring them could bring catastrophe. This is the essence of catastrophizing, the mental magnifying glass that turns specks into mountains. It disguises itself as preparation, masking panic as prudence. You chart out worst-case scenarios with the precision of a strategist, drafting escape plans for disasters that may never come. In those moments, you feel in command, perched on the lookout, ready for whatever might emerge from the dark. And yet, beneath the surface confidence, there is hypervigilance. Your senses heighten and your body tenses. Every creak of the house feels like a warning. Each ticking clock echoes a countdown. Your mind tells you this is necessary. How else would you stay safe? But safety is an illusion when it's built on the shifting sands of fear. Anxiety also hijacks your sense of empowerment. That rush you feel, as if you're solving a complex puzzle, is really a jolt of stress hormones, feeding a loop of distorted logic. You mistake shaking hands for excitement, sweaty palms for passion. You celebrate these physical signs as proof that you're alive, that you're discovering hidden truths, when in fact you're trapped in a feedback loop of self-fulfilling dread. When the world around you feels uncertain, anxiety offers a twisted comfort, the belief that insight arrives only through fear. You scribble endless lists, run mental simulations, rehearse conversations until your mind bleeds frustration. And with each repetition, you convince yourself you're honing your understanding, while deep down you're just spinning in circles. In this cycle, patterns emerge that don't exist. You see betrayal where there is none, risk where there is safety. Your inner critic feeds on these imagined threats, sharpening its blade with every false alarm. You doubt yourself, your motives, your memories, and you cling to the rancid comfort of constant vigilance, believing it is the only way to avoid disaster. True insight, however, blooms in stillness, in listening rather than hunting. It arrives when your mind relaxes, when you allow questions to settle instead of forcing them into rigid answers. Real revelation doesn't demand adrenaline. It whispers in quiet moments, in spaces where fear is not in the driver's seat. But anxiety masquerades as insight because it offers something hard to resist, the promise of control. You tell yourself that if you just think hard enough, plan thoroughly enough, worry just one more minute, you can master uncertainty. Yet worry never yields answers, it only creates new doubts. Awareness is the antidote. The next time your pulse races with a thrill of discovery, pause and ask yourself if you are truly uncovering truth or just echoing fear. Notice the difference between genuine curiosity and anxious compulsion. Let your thoughts breathe, give space to observations untainted by dread. Embrace the idea that some answers come not from relentless questioning, but from moments of release. Insight doesn't require you to wring conclusions from every fearful thought. It emerges when you allow your mind to rest, to wander freely without the weight of impending doom. Your next revelation might arrive during a simple walk, a shared laugh, or even a silent exhale. It won't roar in your ears like a warning siren. It will arrive as a gentle understanding that doesn't demand exhaustion. And when you recognize this softer clarity, you'll see anxiety's mask fall away, revealing the difference between fear-driven illusions and true insight. Stop letting anxiety wear the cloak of wisdom. Reject the false authority of your own alarm bells. You deserve clarity born from calm, revelation born from openness, not from the grinding gears of perpetual fear. But what if simply resting felt like breaking some unspoken rule, a silent crime against your restless mind? You collapse onto the edge of the sofa, every muscle twitching from the day's demands, but the instant your head hits the cushion, a storm of thoughts erupts. Tasks undone, conversations missed, opportunities slipping through your fingers. You try to sink into the softness, but guilt claws at your chest, insisting you don't deserve this pause. Your mind races through a checklist you never finish. Rest feels like an accusation, a loud siren demanding you justify every second you allow yourself to simply be. Why does doing nothing feel so transgressive? You hear a voice in your head, sharp and unrelenting. You're lazy. You could be doing something better. It drones on, a broken record of self-reproach, until peace becomes impossible. Even your heartbeat feels wrong, as if your body betrayed you by attempting to slow down. Anxiety creeps along your spine, reminding you that every moment of rest is a debt you must repay with interest. From childhood, you learned that productivity is virtue. Gold stars on homework, applause for extra chores, endless praise for staying late at practice. You equated worth with output so early that now rest triggers the same alarm bells as failure. You carry those lessons like stones in your pocket, weighing you down whenever you consider letting go. Relaxation transforms into a deadline you'll never meet, a promise you'll never keep. Then there's the myth of hustle culture, whispering in your ear at all hours. Your feed overflows with success stories, founders dropping out of college, influencers hyping sleepless nights as badges of honor, ads promising you'll fall behind if you dare sleep. You become convinced that every extra hour you work, every relentless push brings you closer to your dreams. Yet the harder you chase, the further the finish line retreats, and rest becomes the one failure you cannot afford. Your brain twists this pressure into cognitive traps. All or nothing thinking tells you that if you rest now, you'll lose momentum forever. Perfectionism convinces you that only flawless performance justifies a break. Imposter syndrome murmurs that you're not qualified enough to relax, that someone more deserving could use this time instead. These distortions build a cage around your mind, making rest feel not like rest, but like a step toward annihilation. On a deeper level, your body fights back. Stress hormones surge when you pause, priming you for fight or flight, even though you lie still. Your autonomic nervous system rebels against silence, flooding you with unease. Deep breathing becomes shallow. Muscles clench. Your physiology echoes the same message. Rest is danger. It's a primal reaction, echoing ancestors who could not afford to drop their guard. Today, that reaction betrays you, treating your bed as a battleground. And yet the world exploits this tension. Employers extol availability, praising those who answer emails on weekends, who clock more hours than the next person. Technology blurs work and life until every waking moment feels on call. Notifications pounce the second you relax, dragging you back into the frenzy. You learn to feel guilty for ignoring a buzzing phone, as if your worth depends on immediate responsiveness. Rest becomes a luxury you cannot grant yourself. Over time, the toll mounts. Sleep eludes you because your mind refuses to shut off. Exhaustion becomes chronic, and rest, paradoxically, more elusive. You trade well-being for perceived productivity, but end up doing less of both. Creativity suffers, relationships fray, and life's colors dim. You build a temple of busyness, and rest never finds its way inside. The more you deny yourself, the more the craving for genuine rest eats away at you. But what if rest were a radical act of rebellion? What if pausing, breathing, simply being, was your greatest resistance. True rest fuels clarity. It rebuilds resilience. It sharpens your mind so you work smarter, not harder. Setting boundaries, turning off screens, embracing silence. These aren't weaknesses. They're demonstrations of self-respect. Each moment you honor your need for rest chips away at the toxic idol of constant output. Imagine reclaiming your time in small ways, a 10-minute walk without your phone, a deliberate pause to breathe between meetings, an afternoon where you choose a book over a to-do list. These acts of self-care aren't indulgences, they're assertions of your humanity in a world that treats you like a machine. As you practice rest, the guilt begins to loosen its grip. You learn that permission to pause comes from within and that your value persists even in stillness. Rest isn't a crime, it's your right. It's the foundation of your strength and the birthplace of your creativity. Let each moment of pause remind you that you are more than your achievements. You are worthy simply because you exist. Embracing rest is not surrender, it's a reclaiming of power. And if guilt over resting is your hidden prison, brace yourself to uncover why self-sacrifice has been dressed up as the highest honor. You're walking through a silent corridor lit only by flickering hallway lights when you hear it, a small voice crying out from a locked room. Before you know it, you forced the door open and sprinted inside, ignoring the heat rising around you, the smoke stinging your eyes. You lift someone you don't know into your arms and stagger back into safety, collapsing as the flames consume the floor you just escaped. In that moment, you feel the rush of heroism, the weight of another life in your hands, and beneath it all, a fierce pride in your own sacrifice. But beneath the pride, there's a hollow echo. What will you lose next? And at what cost? You've been told self-sacrifice is noble, an act of pure devotion to causes greater than yourself. You see it in the stories of saints walking barefoot through snow, in the soldiers charging toward gunfire, in the parent who leaves their own dreams behind for a child. You call it love. You call it duty. Yet something in you trembles at the edge of that idea, sensing a snare beneath the applause, a drain behind the medals. Societies carve statues of those who gave everything, as if losing yourself were the highest achievement. You grow up hearing that true virtue lies in emptying your own cup for others to drink. You memorize the words without question. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down their life. But you don't hear the whispers that follow, the ones asking why they never teach you how to refill your own cup, how to breathe when the world demands you hold yours out empty. Consider the way a flower wilts when you pluck it too young, thinking you're honoring its beauty. You admire the petals in your vase, but you've stolen its future. In the same way, self-sacrifice often blooms for a moment under adoring eyes, then withers in the shadows of what you gave away. You become an exhibit of your own martyrdom, praised for your pain but deadened from the inside. In the fine print of every heroic tale lies a warning you rarely read. The hero often returns wounded. Look at the caregiver, burning the candle at both ends, hailed for her unwavering devotion, yet fearing any refusal as a sign of weakness. Notice the activist, driven to break down by causes they love, cheered from the margins even as they crumble at the center. Each is a moth drawn to a flame, convinced the burn is worth the light, until there's nothing left to illuminate. Why do we glorify self-destruction? Because it serves powerful narratives. People who sacrifice appear incorruptible, beyond reproach. Their pain becomes proof of virtue, and the more you give, the more authority you grant to those who ask for it. Ask a self-sacrificer for anything, and they feel compelled to say yes. Guilt becomes their compass, pointing always toward more. Notice how often you apologize when you refuse a request, how quickly you second-guess yourself for choosing rest over work, love over obligation, sanity over chaos. You've been taught that boundaries are selfish, that saying no undermines your worth. But boundaries aren't cruelty, they're shields. They stop the bleeding of your energy so you can stand firm again. When self-sacrifice becomes the measure of your value, you're trapped in a cycle of always giving, never replenishing. You chase the fleeting high of approval, the surge of gratitude that dries up as soon as you pause. You become dependent on other people's needs to feel meaningful, your identity tethered to exhaustion, masquerading as purpose. What would it feel like to walk away from that script? To place your own needs on the altar for a moment, not out of selfishness, but self-preservation. Imagine filling your lungs with your own life force before you exhale it all for someone else. Picture a world where nurturing yourself first isn't betrayal, it's a radical act of survival. Self-care isn't a buzzword, it's a rebellion against the cult of martyrdom. It says your worth isn't defined by how much you suffer, but by how fully you live. When you stop applauding your own erasure, you reclaim the right to exist independent of others' expectations. And that is where true compassion begins, when you offer what you genuinely have, rather than what you've been forced to give. Still, you feel the pull of that old story, tugging at your heart with promises of validation. It whispers that if you ever stop sacrificing, you'll be exposed as unworthy, lazy, indifferent. It convinces you that self-preservation is the opposite of love. But what if the real opposite of love is depletion? What if, by refusing to starve yourself, you become stronger in every way that matters? Self-sacrifice is celebrated until it breaks you, and then it's quietly replaced by a new hero to worship. If you never question the cult of endless giving, you never see the stagehands pulling the strings behind the spotlight. You keep playing your part, believing that your sacrifice is both your identity and your salvation. But salvation was never meant to be found in your own undoing. You deserve more than a headline or a plaque commemorating your suffering. You deserve a life where your boundaries are honored, your rest is respected, and your worth isn't measured by your wounds. Protect yourself as fiercely as you protect others, because in the end, the most radical act of love you can offer is the one you give back to yourself. What if the very praises that fuel your selflessness are the invisible shackles that keep you running forever? Have you ever found yourself chasing something you can't quite see, can't quite name, but somehow feel desperate to catch? It's almost like running after a scent on the wind, intoxicating, elusive, and never quite tangible. These are the invisible rewards that keep you chasing, and they're everywhere, lurking in the quiet mechanics of your mind, embedded so deeply that you rarely even notice them pulling your strings. Picture a slot machine, not the clunky metal boxes of old, but the sleek, glowing apps on your phone. Every spin might give you a little buzz, a tiny rush of possibility. Most of the time you win nothing, but now and then, just often enough, you hit a small jackpot. That unpredictable hit lights up your brain with dopamine, training you to keep pulling, keep playing, keep hoping. This is the power of intermittent reinforcement, the same principle that underpins gambling, social media, even some of your closest relationships. You don't need a guaranteed prize. In fact, uncertainty makes it more addictive. Your brain becomes a willing hostage, salivating for the next surprise. But the rewards that keep you chasing aren't always neon lit or accompanied by flashing lights. Sometimes they're buried in subtle moments of approval, a nod from your boss, a like on your post, a compliment tossed casually by someone whose opinion you value more than you care to admit. Each is a tiny invisible treat. They seem harmless, almost trivial. Yet, collectively, they mold your behavior, guiding your choices without you ever realizing who or what is holding the reins. Consider how workplaces exploit this. You toil away on projects, often underpaid, frequently underappreciated. But then your manager praises your dedication during a meeting. Or maybe you get an email from a higher up, a quick sentence about your potential. It's intangible, costs them nothing, yet it fuels you for weeks, maybe months. You stay late, pick up extra work, all for the hope of more invisible rewards. Promotions are rare, raises are modest, but the psychological candy is endless, and it's just enough to keep you from questioning why your hard work feels so hollow. Even deeper are the invisible rewards society hands you for playing by its rules. You're praised for being agreeable, for not rocking the boat, for swallowing your discomfort. You're quietly celebrated for enduring toxic situations with a smile, for prioritizing appearances over authenticity. Each time you avoid conflict, each time you compromise your needs for someone else's comfort, you're rewarded with relief, temporary peace that masquerades as something meaningful. This relief is so seductive that you keep seeking it, building a life around minimizing friction rather than maximizing fulfillment. Relationships are rife with these invisible incentives. Ever stayed with someone longer than you should because of the hope they'd eventually change? Every tiny gesture of affection, every fleeting promise becomes a payout that justifies your patience. You learn to live on emotional breadcrumbs, convincing yourself they're a feast. The moments of tenderness stand out starkly against long stretches of neglect, making them feel disproportionately significant. You become hooked, not on consistency, but on scarcity, forever chasing the next scrap of validation. Your own mind plays along too. It rewards you with comfort whenever you lie to yourself. Tell yourself your job isn't soul-crushing, that your relationship isn't suffocating, that your dreams weren't that important anyway, and you'll feel immediate, soothing relief. This is a self-inflicted, invisible reward, a gentle pat on the back from your subconscious for choosing the path of least resistance. It's easier to chase this comfort than face painful truths. And so the lie becomes its own incentive, a soft bed you're reluctant to ever climb out of. But the most disturbing part, these invisible rewards don't just keep you chasing, they keep you small. They discourage disruption. They ensure you stay predictable, manageable, controllable. As long as you're dancing for scraps, likes, compliments, momentary relief, you're too busy to demand real change, too distracted to notice how little genuine satisfaction you're actually receiving. Imagine, for a moment, stepping off this treadmill. Imagine refusing to chase rewards you can't see, that offer no lasting nourishment. Imagine redefining what payoff means, seeking substance over scraps, truth over temporary comfort. It's terrifying because it means walking away from everything familiar. It means facing silence where praise used to be, uncertainty where validation once lived. But it also means reclaiming your agency. It means finally running towards something real, something you choose, not something conditioned into you. And that brings us to something even more insidious, something your mind clings to because it feels safe, even when it isn't confirmation bias. Ever wonder why it's so comforting to only look for what you already believe? Let's unravel that next. Why do you think your mind clings so desperately to ideas that confirm what you already believe? Why does it feel almost like relief to hear someone echo your opinions, even if deep down you suspect they might be wrong? The answer is hauntingly simple. Confirmation bias feels safe. It's a cozy blanket that shields you from the biting chill of uncertainty. It allows you to nestle into familiar thoughts, to wrap yourself in the comforting certainty that you are right, and by extension, good, wise, maybe even superior. Your brain is wired to protect you, not just from physical threats, but from psychological ones. Contradictory evidence isn't just inconvenient, it feels like an attack, so your mind builds walls. It filters out what doesn't fit, reshapes facts until they bend to your narrative, and rewards you with little bursts of pleasure each time your worldview is validated. That pleasure is deceptive. It isn't truth, it's a drug. Every agreeable opinion, every like-minded voice is another hit, another reason to stay exactly where you are. Consider how easily this plays out in your daily life. You read articles that align with your political leanings, watch videos that reaffirm your existing beliefs, spend time with people who nod along to your perspectives. Each choice feels so natural you hardly notice it. But underneath, there's a quiet avoidance. You're dodging discomfort, skirting the edges of anything that might force you to question yourself. Think about the last time someone truly challenged you, really shook the ground beneath your feet. Did you listen? Or did you rush to defend, to deflect, to dismiss? Your mind isn't looking for enlightenment. It's looking for security. It craves the illusion of a solid, unshakable identity, one not threatened by the messy ambiguity of conflicting ideas. This instinct was once about survival. Early humans who stuck to their tribe's beliefs and distrusted outsiders were less likely to be cast out, less likely to stand alone when danger struck. In a way, your confirmation bias is a leftover survival tool. But today, it often backfires. Now it isolates you, calcifies your mind, makes growth feel like a threat instead of a gift. Even worse, confirmation bias is so seductive because it feels like moral clarity. You're not just right, you're righteous. The people who disagree with you aren't merely mistaken, they're dangerous, ignorant, maybe even evil. This moral high ground feels incredible. It drowns out self-doubt, spares you the pain of reconsidering your own flaws, and lets you direct all that messy uncertainty outward. It's why conspiracy theories thrive. It's why entire communities form around the mutual reinforcement of shared delusions. It's why echo chambers on social media are so addictive. Each like, each comment of agreement is another stitch tightening the cocoon of your bias. Meanwhile, reality becomes secondary. The comforting fiction takes precedence over the frightening complexity of truth. But there's a sinister cost, because each time you surrender to confirmation bias, you hand over a little piece of your freedom. You trade away the expansive, sometimes painful adventure of real understanding for the cramped, stagnant security of never questioning yourself. You stay small, certain, and safely ignorant. It doesn't have to be this way. Imagine, for a moment, deliberately seeking out ideas that contradict your own. Not to win an argument or prove them wrong, but to genuinely explore why someone might see the world differently. Imagine the mental toughness it takes to say, maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe there's more I haven't considered. That is the kind of bravery most people never dare attempt, because it's risky. It's destabilizing. It means dismantling the very structures that hold your sense of self together. Who are you without your cherished beliefs? Without the soothing story that you are on the right side of everything? Who are you if you have to admit that sometimes you're wrong? Yet that's where real growth happens. On the other side of discomfort, beyond the protective shell of your biases. True intelligence, true wisdom, requires vulnerability. It demands that you stand naked before uncertainty and refuse to flinch. So the next time you feel that warm glow of agreement, that surge of satisfaction when your ideas are confirmed, pause. Ask yourself whether you're learning something real or just feeding a need to feel safe. Because safety, in this context, is often just a cage. And maybe that's what should trouble you most, that your own mind, in its desperate rush to protect you, might be the very thing holding you back from truth. But what if the real danger isn't just in your ideas? What if it's buried even deeper, in motives you don't dare examine? What if the reasons you think you believe are only half the story? Have you ever wondered why even the people closest to you keep certain truths locked away, buried beneath layers of polite smiles and carefully chosen words? The unsettling answer is that our true motives are almost always hidden, sometimes from others, often even from ourselves. You think you're honest, transparent, an open book. But look closer. There are chapters in your mind, written in invisible ink, stories you refuse to read because they reveal too much about who you really are. It starts small, a little white lie here, a gentle omission there. You say you didn't want the promotion because the timing wasn't right, when deep down you're terrified of failing. You say you forgave someone because you're compassionate, when really it was easier than confronting your own simmering anger. You say you stayed in that relationship out of love, but perhaps it was fear of loneliness that whispered more sweetly in the dark. These hidden motives aren't always sinister. Sometimes they're desperate acts of self-preservation. Your mind constructs elegant stories to shield you from truths too sharp to hold. You convince yourself you're generous because you like giving, not because it buys you approval. You say you're patient because you value harmony, not because you dread confrontation. In the theater of your own mind, you're both playwright and audience, eager to believe the script that flatters you most. And it doesn't stop with personal lies. Watch how people navigate social spaces, carefully, strategically. Altruism often carries an unspoken price tag. Compliments are traded like currency. Favors extended are investments in future obligations. Even kindness can become a camouflage for subtle power plays. Your motives wear masks, smiling sweetly as they hide deeper hungers for control, validation, superiority. Then there's the truly dark part, how you hide your motives even from yourself. You tell yourself you're worried about a friend's risky decisions out of concern, but beneath that concern, is there a thrill in watching them stumble? You say you're striving for success to provide for loved ones, but how much of it is really about feeding your own hunger for status? Your conscious mind whispers noble reasons because it can't bear to look into the cavern where raw, unfiltered drives live. But why keep these motives hidden? Because if they stood in the light, they'd rewrite your self-image. You'd have to admit that compassion can be tainted by vanity, that loyalty can be rooted in fear, that even love might sometimes be fueled by a craving for possession. These aren't comfortable admissions, so your mind edits them out, smoothing the rough edges until your story feels clean, heroic, digestible. Yet underneath it all, your true motives continue to steer you, quietly, invisibly, with a grip tighter than any conscious decision. You might think you're choosing freely, but in reality, you're often obeying impulses you refuse to acknowledge. Every time you judge someone harshly, what unspoken insecurity is whispering in your ear? Every time you leap to help, what hidden need are you secretly satisfying? Every time you withdraw in silence, what darker wish takes pleasure in seeing someone twist in uncertainty? Understanding this doesn't make you cruel or broken, it makes you human. Everyone carries these shadow motives, these silent directors that shape their every act. What separates the truly self-aware from the rest is the willingness to question the polished narratives they've built. To ask, what am I really getting out of this? What am I so desperate to hide, even from myself? Because the greatest deception isn't fooling others, it's fooling yourself. You become your own willing victim, embracing half-truths that keep you comfortable. But comfort is fragile. It shatters the moment life forces you to see the gap between who you claim to be and who you actually are. So look deeper. Pull back the veil. Ask the questions that scare you. Because until you do, your hidden motives will keep pulling your strings, and you'll keep calling it destiny. And isn't it chilling to consider that in the end, guilt, more than any lofty principle, might be the real force guiding every decision you make? Have you ever stopped to consider how every single decision you make, every choice, big or small, is quietly puppeteered by guilt? Not just the obvious kind, the remorse that makes you apologize when you've hurt someone, but the subtler, more insidious guilt that seeps into every crack of your mind and steers you without your consent. You pick up the phone when you'd rather let it ring. You say yes to favors that hollow you out. You stay longer at gatherings, smile longer at jokes, offer more of yourself than you truly want to give. Why? Because somewhere deep inside, guilt is whispering that to do otherwise makes you selfish, unkind, or somehow wrong. Trace this back to your earliest memories, being taught to share toys even when you didn't want to say sorry even when you weren't sure what you'd done. You learned quickly that guilt is a tether, and avoiding it means compliance. The pull of guilt is stronger than almost any logical argument. It overrides your comfort, your preferences, even your well-being, because you're terrified of being labeled uncaring or cruel. Think about how guilt shapes your work life. How often do you stay late, take on extra tasks, cover for colleagues, not because you want to, but because guilt keeps you chained to the idea that good people sacrifice without question? Companies thrive on this. They don't just buy your labor, they bank on your guilt. They know you'll stay silent when workloads crush you because you'd rather bear the burden than risk disappointing someone, or worse, being seen as lazy or incompetent. And what about your personal relationships? Guilt carves itself deepest there. You bite your tongue around family to keep the peace. You lend money you can't spare. You forgive betrayals because guilt tells you that holding boundaries is heartless. You replay conversations at night, worried you didn't say enough, do enough, care enough. Even your closest bonds are laced with the fear that failing to show up perfectly will mark you as unloving. Wider still, guilt is a social glue that systems expertly manipulate. You're bombarded with messages telling you to feel guilty if you're not productive enough, not charitable enough, not politically engaged enough. Buy this product to save the planet. Donate here, or you're complicit in suffering. Post this, or you're silent on injustice. Each plea hooks into your guilt, not to genuinely awaken your compassion, but to keep you obedient, spending, and quietly afraid of moral failure. But guilt doesn't just steer you into action, it also paralyzes you. Have you ever wanted to make a radical change, stand up for yourself, or walk away from something toxic, only to be slammed by guilt so hard you couldn't move? That's how guilt cages you. It convinces you that your freedom is theft from someone else. That prioritizing your needs is a crime against those who depend on your compliance. Ironically, guilt's grip is strongest in the hearts of good people. If you're empathetic, thoughtful, conscientious, guilt will latch on and steer you with the gentlest touch. You'll volunteer more time, give more chances, shoulder more blame. Because guilt knows your mind is fertile ground. It only needs to plant a seed of doubt, and you'll do the rest, punishing yourself for failing impossible standards. Yet here's the uncomfortable twist. Most of this guilt is irrational. It's a conditioned response, not a moral compass. True morality comes from understanding harm and choosing to avoid it. But guilt keeps you tethered to expectations that often have nothing to do with real ethics and everything to do with control. It's a tool that ensures you stay agreeable, predictable, and easily managed. So the next time you feel that tightening in your chest, that sick churn in your stomach nudging you toward a decision you don't truly want, pause, ask who benefits from this guilt. Who stands to gain from you bending, yielding, sacrificing? Is it actually about right and wrong? Or is it about maintaining a story where your needs always come last? Because guilt is cunning. It dresses itself up as your conscience, masquerades as virtue. But more often than not, it's just another leash, guiding your choices, keeping you docile, afraid to live fully on your own terms. And if guilt is steering your every move, what happens when you finally cut the strings? That's a question worth sitting with. Especially because next we'll unravel how illusions of control are crafted precisely to soothe those left powerless by guilt's relentless grip. Have you ever caught yourself clutching the tiny steering wheel of your life, convinced you're in control, only to realize the car was never really yours to steer? It's a cruel comfort, this illusion of control, a fragile trick that keeps the powerless from spiraling into despair. Because the alternative, accepting how little sway you truly have, might just shatter you completely. Think about how meticulously you organize your day. You make lists, you plan meetings, you schedule workouts. It feels empowering, doesn't it? Like you're the architect of your destiny. But how easily does it all unravel? A single phone call, an unexpected diagnosis, an economic downturn, a drunk driver running a red light. In seconds, your carefully arranged world lies scattered at your feet. Yet tomorrow, you'll make another list, draw up more plans, because surrendering to chaos is unbearable. So you cling tighter to your illusion. This trick runs deep. Casinos know it. Ever notice how they let you pick your own numbers, press your own buttons, roll your own dice? They hand you the reins of meaningless decisions, so you feel involved, so you feel in control. Meanwhile, the odds are stacked, the house always wins, and your illusion costs you dearly. It's not just gambling. Look at your job. Maybe you get to choose what brand of coffee sits on your desk, or what color to paint your cubicle wall. These little freedoms are fed to you deliberately, because if you're busy exercising tiny choices, you're less likely to question the larger forces that lock your wages, siphon your time, and dictate your worth. Even democracy offers its subtle illusions. You're told your vote shapes the nation, that your voice matters equally. But powerful lobbies, corporate interests, and algorithmic manipulation mold outcomes long before your ballot is ever cast. You hold your slip of paper proudly, feeling the weight of your influence, blind to how the game was rigged before you even entered the booth. Psychologically, illusions of control are more than manipulation, they're survival mechanisms. Studies show that people who believe they have control, even falsely, suffer less stress, recover from illnesses faster, live longer. Your mind clings to any narrative that says you're steering the ship, because accepting the vast ocean of randomness is terrifying. But there's a sinister side to this comfort. Those in power understand your desperate need to believe. So they inflate the illusion, keep you docile and self-blaming. If you fail, it must be because you didn't try hard enough, didn't hustle enough, didn't optimize your mindset. The system never comes under scrutiny, only you do. You internalize every setback as a personal shortfall, never daring to look up and see the towering structures built specifically to keep you in your place. Meanwhile, the comfort of control distracts you from solidarity. If you're busy believing your fate rests entirely in your hands, why stand shoulder to shoulder with others? Why fight collective battles when your personal grit is supposedly enough? The illusion isolates you, divides you, pacifies you. And maybe that's the most tragic part. These illusions lull you to sleep. They soothe your anxieties with lullabies of personal agency, all while storms rage beyond your window. You dream sweet dreams of sovereignty, never noticing who dims your lights, who locks your doors, who scripts your dreams. Yet imagine, for just a moment, what lies beyond these illusions. If you could strip away the comforting lies, confront the terrifying vastness of what you can't control, perhaps then you'd finally grasp what you can. Your voice, your alliances, your refusal to quietly accept. True power doesn't come from pretending to steer. It comes from recognizing the ocean's fury and choosing to row anyway alongside others who see the storm as clearly as you do. Because once you see through the illusion, you can never be tamed by it again. And that's precisely what those in power fear most. But what if the illusion wasn't simply a trick to keep you passive? What if it also guarded you from something darker? Get ready, because next we'll explore how your deepest fears can suddenly become your greatest focus. What happens to your mind when fear grips you? Notice how everything else fades. The chatter, the casual concerns, the drifting daydreams, they all collapse into a single razor-sharp point of focus. Fear, more than any motivational quote or self-imposed discipline, has an unrivaled power to direct your attention. It's primal, ancient, hardwired into the architecture of your brain. When you sense danger, your body floods with adrenaline, your pupils dilate, your muscles tighten. But more than anything, your awareness narrows, zeroing in on the threat. It's survival, plain and simple. Imagine standing on a high ledge, looking down, your heart pounds, your hands sweat, your breath comes shallow. In that moment, your mind isn't wandering to unpaid bills or tomorrow's tasks. It's locked in, fully consumed by the edge, the drop, the fear. Every sensory input is amplified. You're hyper-aware of the wind brushing your skin, the rough texture of the ledge beneath your feet, the dizzying depth below. Fear has stripped away every irrelevant thought and left only what matters for survival. This sharpening effect is why fear can sometimes feel exhilarating. It cuts through the noise, gifting you a rare moment of pure, undiluted presence. No distractions, no competing priorities, just you and the immediate reality. Athletes chase this feeling. So do thrill seekers and risk takers. They dance with fear precisely because it forces them into the now, into a heightened state where everything else vanishes. But here's the uncomfortable paradox. While fear can sharpen your focus, it also shrinks it. You become so intensely tuned to the threat that the broader world disappears. Imagine walking through a dark forest at night, convinced something is lurking just beyond sight. Every snap of a twig sends your mind spiraling. You might miss the beauty of the moonlight filtering through the branches, the quiet rustle of nocturnal life, all because your senses are hijacked by fear. This is the mind's trade-off: clarity in a narrow band, blindness to everything else. Fear makes you miss things, sometimes important things. It funnels your attention so tightly that you overlook nuances, misread intentions, jump to conclusions. That's why fear is such an effective tool for manipulation. Leaders, marketers, even the inner voices in your head understand this. They conjure fears, real or imagined, because a frightened mind is a focused mind and also a controllable one. Think about how many decisions in your life have been driven by fear. Not grand, cinematic terror, but quieter, more insidious varieties: fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not measuring up. These fears direct your choices, often without you even realizing it. They keep you stuck in jobs you hate, relationships that drain you, routines that numb rather than fulfill. And the cruel irony: you justify it all as caution, as wisdom, as practicality. But peel back the layers, and you'll often find fear meticulously shaping your life's architecture. It's important to see how fear's sharpening quality can be both a gift and a cage. Yes, it makes you alert. Yes, it clears the fog of trivial distractions. But it also locks you into a narrow corridor of thought, limiting your capacity to see alternatives, to imagine possibilities beyond the immediate threat. It carves a tunnel through your mind, and everything outside that tunnel is left in darkness. So what can you do with this knowledge? You can start by noticing when fear is driving your focus. Ask yourself, is this clarity or is it tunnel vision? Am I truly perceiving the situation, or am I just reacting to the echo chamber of my own anxieties? Awareness doesn't eliminate fear, but it does loosen its grip. It gives you just enough space to step back, to widen your lens, to remember there's more to reality than the single terrifying point your mind fixates on. Fear sharpens your focus, yes, but it's up to you to decide what deserves that sharpened attention. Otherwise, you risk living a life perpetually honed on shadows and worst-case scenarios, never seeing the broader, richer landscape that lies just beyond your narrowed gaze. And speaking of narrowed gazes, have you ever wondered why your curiosity seems to vanish the moment something new pulls at your attention? Keep listening, because the next revelation might change how you chase wonder forever. Have you ever paid attention to what happens in your mind when your phone buzzes, or when a random thought crashes through your focus like a reckless driver swerving into your lane? In that instant, whatever deep, curious thread your brain was tugging on snaps. Your mental state doesn't just pause, it resets entirely. You don't return to the same question with the same intensity. You start over, slightly dulled, slightly displaced, chasing novelty instead of depth. Your brain's curiosity is delicate, fragile, really. It's built to explore, to wander down intricate pathways of why and what if, uncovering insights that might have changed you. But every small distraction, a notification, a casual interruption, a minor task you suddenly remember, acts like a blade, slicing through that fragile thread. You lose the subtle build-up of thought. You lose momentum. You lose the exact shape of wonder you were just beginning to sculpt. Think about a time you were reading something fascinating or untangling a complex problem. Suddenly, someone calls your name, or you remember you left the stove on, or your phone lights up with a meaningless update. That pure, expanding curiosity collapses into something mundane. You're no longer deep inside the problem. You're surface level again, forced to pick up fragments of the thought and try to reassemble them. Most of the time, you don't bother. It feels like too much work to reignite that spark. Curiosity resets at every distraction. This means your capacity for deep understanding isn't just a matter of intelligence or interest, it's about uninterrupted mental space. The modern world, however, is designed precisely to fracture that space. Notifications are engineered to pull your attention away before your thoughts can become too deep, too costly in time, too consuming to monetize. Algorithms don't want you engrossed in slow-blooming curiosity. They want you chasing shallow curiosities that reset over and over, each click a fresh start that benefits them, not you. And it's not just technology. Even your own anxious mind can be a saboteur. As soon as you start probing something uncomfortable, some contradiction in your beliefs, some unsettling question about your relationships or your purpose, your thoughts often dart away to easier, safer territory. You wonder about dinner plans instead. You start drafting mental to-do lists. That momentary discomfort triggers a reset. Curiosity is most fragile, exactly where it's most needed, at the edge of your comfort zone, right where transformation waits. Imagine how much of yourself is lost to these resets. How many profound realizations flicker into existence, only to vanish when your focus snaps under the weight of trivial intrusions. Each time, your brain has to climb the mountain again from the base, never quite reaching the hidden peak where perspective truly changes. The cost isn't just lost thoughts, it's lost versions of you. Alternate selves who might have understood something vital, who might have grown or shifted or healed. Worse still, you don't even notice it happening. Because curiosity's resets feel normal, expected. You tell yourself you'll think about it later. You rarely do. Instead, you pick up some simpler, shinier distraction, and the deeper trail goes cold forever. The system is cleverly self-erasing. You can't mourn what you don't remember losing. So you become someone living mostly on the surface of your mind, chasing curiosities that start and end within seconds, rarely risking the long, disorienting dive that could genuinely change how you see yourself or the world. You're left with countless beginnings, abandoned midway, each one evidence of how easily your mind's most precious processes are hijacked. Ask yourself, what might you have discovered if you'd been allowed to follow your thoughts without interruption? Who might you be right now if every moment of curiosity hadn't been reset before it could finish rewriting you? Hold that discomfort, because next we'll explore something even more insidious, how your relentless busyness doesn't just fracture your thoughts, but conceals a deeper emptiness you might not be ready to see. What if I told you that the reason you're always busy, the reason your calendar is packed, your to-do list never ends, and your notifications never stop buzzing, has very little to do with ambition or productivity? What if I told you that your busyness is often just a disguise, a frantic mask carefully stitched together to hide something far more fragile, your loneliness? Think about how often you rush from one obligation to the next. Meetings, errands, texts, emails. You fill every spare moment with podcasts, background noise, endless scrolling. You tell yourself it's efficiency, progress, a life well lived. But deep down, can you admit that sometimes you're just terrified of being alone with your own thoughts? Alone with the silence that might echo too loudly, revealing the hollow spaces inside you. You stay busy because it keeps your mind occupied, darting from one shallow concern to another, never settling long enough to confront the deeper ache. Because what happens when you stop, when the noise fades and you're left with just you? Maybe you start to feel it, the subtle, gnawing emptiness. The realization that despite the swarm of contacts in your phone and the flood of notifications, there's a profound absence, not of people, but of connection. And so you keep moving, keep scheduling, keep saying yes, not because your life demands it, but because your loneliness does. It begs for distraction, pleads for motion, anything to avoid sitting still long enough to confront the raw truth that you might not be as connected, as loved, or as understood as you want to believe. Consider how society praises busyness. How often do you hear someone proudly declare, "I've just been so busy lately," as if it's a badge of honor, as if being perpetually occupied means you're important, valued, indispensable. Rarely do we pause to see it for what it might also be, a convenient smokescreen. Because admitting you're lonely feels shameful, like confessing a personal failing. So instead, you cloak it in busyness, acceptable, even admirable. But here's the painful irony. The more you pile on obligations, the less room you have for genuine intimacy. You become too tired to meet up with friends without an agenda, too drained to have conversations that wander into vulnerability. You trade long, meandering talks for quick, efficient exchanges. Slowly you starve the very connections that could ease your loneliness, all in the name of staying busy enough not to feel it. Even your moments of so-called rest aren't immune. You don't relax, you anesthetize. Streaming show after show, mindlessly scrolling, compulsively checking your phone. It's rest that isn't restful. It's company that isn't companionship. It's all a carefully curated buffer between you and the unsettling possibility of having to confront your solitude. Worse still, busyness doesn't just hide loneliness, it feeds it. Because as you pour your time into tasks, errands, obligations that keep real closeness at bay, you drift further from the meaningful connections you crave. You build a life that looks full from the outside, but feels desperately empty from within. A life so crowded, there's no space left for intimacy to take root. And underneath it all sits a deeper fear. If you slow down, if you stop filling every moment, what if you discover that there's no one truly there? What if the silence reveals that the bonds you thought you had are weaker than you imagined? What if you're not just alone in this moment, but fundamentally alone? So you stay busy, because busyness means you don't have to answer those questions. It keeps the door to your loneliness firmly shut. It allows you to tell yourself a comforting story that you're simply too occupied to be lonely, that someday, when things slow down, you'll reconnect, rebuild, find depth. Even if, deep down, you suspect that day may never come. But what would happen if you stopped, if you let the silence speak? If you risked discovering the weight of your own loneliness so you could finally begin the difficult, necessary work of addressing it, of building connections that go beyond the superficial clutter of your calendar? What if, instead of drowning it in tasks, you listened to what your loneliness was trying to tell you? Because ignoring it won't make it disappear. Busyness might mask your loneliness, but it also guarantees it will stay. Only by slowing down, by daring to sit with the discomfort, can you start to understand what you're truly missing and what you might need to change to finally feel less alone. And if that idea unsettles you, wait until you see how easily your need to belong can be manipulated, even without a single word spoken. Picture a crowded room. People packed shoulder to shoulder, voices blending into a soft, inescapable murmur. No one is speaking to you directly. No one is telling you what to think or how to feel. And yet, something shifts inside you. You adjust how you stand. You soften your voice. Your laugh changes shape. Subtle, almost invisible corrections ripple through your mind and body, all because you're surrounded by others doing the same. That's how conformity arrives, without words. It doesn't knock on your door and announce itself. It slips in quietly, threading itself through your instincts, your fears, your craving for acceptance. You start mirroring people without realizing their opinions bleed into your own. Their judgments shape your standards, and soon their reality becomes your reality. You're no longer thinking entirely for yourself. You're thinking for the crowd. Most people imagine peer pressure as something blatant, a dare, a direct order, a mocking challenge. But the most powerful form of social pressure isn't confrontational, it's ambient. It's the nervous glance at someone raising an eyebrow when you speak up. It's the awkward silence after you share an unpopular opinion. It's the tiny, almost imperceptible retreat of bodies and faces, telling you, without a single word, that you've stepped outside the invisible lines. And so you adapt, because being outcast is ancient terror. Your brain is hardwired to avoid it. Belonging once meant survival. Isolation meant death. Even now, surrounded by technology, comfort and supposed independence, that primal fear still thrums in your veins. It whispers, stay with the herd, blend in, don't give them a reason to push you out. So you start agreeing with things you once questioned. You laugh at jokes that make you uneasy. You nod along when someone criticizes a person you like. Not because you've changed your mind, but because it's easier, safer, more comfortable. Conformity feels like protection, like armor made of social approval. But what's the cost of this unspoken allegiance? Slowly, your individuality erodes. Your beliefs become fragile, pliable, subject to the subtle tides of collective mood. And the more you go along, the more you lose the ability to stand apart. You forget how to stand alone. Think about history, how entire populations have committed atrocities, not because millions of people were inherently cruel, but because conformity drowned out conscience. People looked sideways, saw what everyone else was doing, and followed suit. Silence became complicity. Complicity became horror, all born from the desperate human need to belong. Even your smallest choices aren't immune. What you wear, what you post online, how you decorate your home, so much of it isn't purely your taste. It's a reflection of countless silent cues absorbed from peers, media, fleeting trends. Conformity molds you so subtly that you often mistake it for authentic preference. You believe you're choosing freely, unaware of the unseen strings guiding your hands. And yet, conformity doesn't even require agreement. It thrives on avoidance. You might disagree in your heart, feel the itch of dissonance, but if you say nothing, do nothing, the effect is the same. The group remains intact, the illusion of consensus unbroken, and the silent machinery of social control hums on. Ask yourself, how many of your beliefs are truly yours? How many of your daily choices would remain unchanged if stripped of the fear of judgment? It's a sobering thought that so much of who you are could be nothing more than an echo of other people's expectations. And here's the cruelest trick. Conformity rewards you in the moment. It soothes anxiety, grants approval, promises safety. But over time, it hollows you out. It makes you smaller than you're meant to be. Less curious, less courageous, less alive. Because while conformity arrives without words, it stays without challenge. It endures only if you never stop to question why you're moving with the crowd in the first place. So the next time you feel that subtle nudge to blend in, pause, ask what's truly yours and what's been silently handed to you. Because if you don't, you may wake up one day realizing you've lived someone else's life entirely, never once hearing your own true voice. Which leads us into something even more sinister. Why the mind eagerly accepts fake solutions just to hush the rising tide of anxiety. Have you ever caught yourself clinging to something that doesn't actually solve your problem, just makes you feel like it does? It's unsettling how easy it is to mistake relief for resolution. Your mind craves certainty, closure, a feeling that everything is under control. So it snatches at whatever soothes the anxiety, even if it's hollow, even if it's fake. That quick fix becomes your emotional sedative, masking the deeper issues without ever addressing them. Think about how often you reach for distractions. A glowing screen, endless feeds, binge-worthy series, each offers the illusion of escape. Your worries seem to fade, but they're only waiting in the quiet for your attention to slip. You soothe the surface, while the roots of your anxiety keep growing, twisting deeper into you. It's like sweeping dirt under a rug. The mess doesn't vanish, it just hides where you won't look. And then there are the stories you tell yourself. Little lies polished into comforting mantras. It's not that bad. I'll deal with it later. Other people have it worse. These aren't solutions, they're soft barriers protecting you from truths you're not ready to confront. They offer temporary calm by sidestepping reality. The cost? You stay stuck. The real issues fester in the dark, unchallenged, gaining quiet power over you. How many purchases have you justified because you believed owning something new would fix your mood, your loneliness, your restlessness? Retail therapy isn't a joke. It's a carefully engineered sedative. It spikes your dopamine, numbs your unease, gives you a fleeting high. But it never addresses why you felt empty in the first place. When the glow fades, the void feels even sharper, driving you back for another hit of artificial satisfaction. Even your self-help habits can become fake solutions. You chase productivity hacks, vision boards, morning routines, believing they'll finally organize your chaos. They feel like progress, but sometimes they're just rituals that let you avoid the deeper, uglier work. Questioning why you're anxious, confronting the fears you bury under layers of busy optimism. The illusion of improvement replaces the discomfort of transformation. Fake solutions thrive because they're easy, they're socially sanctioned. Everyone nods along when you brag about your new gadget, your self-care spa day, your perfectly curated workspace. They applaud your calm exterior, never asking what's rotting beneath, because they're doing the same thing. A collective agreement to keep the mask on, to avoid the hard questions, to stay sedated together. Why does this matter? Because fake solutions steal your chance at real healing. They lull you into inertia. They trick you into thinking you've dealt with your problems when all you've done is anesthetize them. Your anxiety may quiet for a moment, but the source of your suffering remains untouched, whispering in the silence, growing stronger precisely because you refuse to face it head-on. Imagine instead if you paused when discomfort surged. If you sat with it, examined it, asked what it was trying to teach you. That's not pleasant. It's brutal. It might reveal truths about your relationships, your career, your self-worth that you'd rather not see. But that's where genuine solutions live, in the raw, unfiltered honesty that hurts before it heals. Real solutions don't always calm your anxiety at first. They often amplify it, because they force you to confront the roots of your fear, the contradictions in your choices, the lies you've built your comfort on. They demand more than passive consumption or gentle reassurance. They demand action, change, sacrifice, and that's terrifying, which is why most people keep reaching for the easy balm instead. But look closer. Notice how your fake solutions decay over time. How the thrill of a purchase fades, how the novelty of distraction wears off, how your rehearsed reassurances start to sound hollow even to your own ears. That's your subconscious begging for something real. It's telling you that peace isn't found in avoidance. It's found in the courage to dismantle what's truly wrong. Ask yourself, are you trying to solve your anxiety or just silence it? Because one path leads to temporary numbness, the other to profound, if uncomfortable, transformation. The difference is everything. And if that thought makes you squirm, wait until you see how your pride quietly poisons your ability to grow. Have you ever noticed how pride tends to masquerade as strength? It stands there, chest out, head high, whispering that it's the very thing keeping you powerful, untouchable, safe from the humiliations of vulnerability. Pride tells you that bending is weakness, that admitting fault is surrender, that changing your mind is betrayal. But what if pride is not your armor? What if it's your cage? Imagine a towering oak in the middle of a violent storm. Its rigid trunk refuses to yield, to sway with the wind, because it sees such bending as beneath its dignity. And so it cracks, splinters, collapses under forces it could have survived had it only allowed itself a little humility. That's your pride. It hardens you exactly when you most need to be soft, locks you in place when adaptation would save you. You see it in relationships, where pride demands that you stay silent rather than apologize, that you nurse grudges rather than risk looking foolish by forgiving first. It turns moments of closeness into cold distances, poisons connections that might have healed if only you had been willing to speak 3 simple words. I was wrong. Pride whispers, it's better to be right than to be close. But tell me, when the silence stretches on, when the gap grows so wide you can no longer see the person on the other side, was being right worth it? Think about growth itself. True growth requires confrontation with your own inadequacies. It means staring directly at the parts of yourself that make you squirm, the laziness, the envy, the irrational fears, the quiet cruelties. But pride stands there like a stern gatekeeper, insisting that you're already fine just as you are. It shields you from the discomfort of self-scrutiny, but in doing so, it also shields you from transformation. It stops you from asking hard questions. Am I actually living according to my values, or just protecting an image of myself that feels comfortable? Pride turns learning into a threat. How many times have you dismissed new ideas, rejected criticism, or mocked perspectives different from your own? Not because they were wrong, but because accepting them would have meant admitting you didn't have it all figured out, that you were still, embarrassingly, unfinished. Pride promises certainty. It offers you a sturdy self-image at the cost of an open mind. And in doing so, it barricades the very doors through which wisdom might have entered. Look at the world right now. Entire groups, entire nations even, fueled by collective pride, refuse to reconsider harmful traditions, cruel policies, or outdated beliefs. Pride swells up with national anthems and flags and histories retold with selective memory. It convinces millions that to question the way things are is to betray who they are. So progress stalls. Justice waits outside, tapping its foot, wondering how long it will have to stand in the cold until pride finally exhausts itself. But it's even more intimate than that. Pride stops you from seeking help when you're drowning. It tells you that to struggle alone is noble, that to lean on another is shameful. So you isolate. You pretend. You smile when your heart is breaking. You pour yourself into distraction, hoping no one will notice how desperately you need saving. Pride ensures you remain exactly where you are, stuck, small, frightened behind a mask of superiority. And the cruel irony is that pride often doesn't even protect what it claims to. It makes you brittle, easily threatened, constantly guarding your image. The tiniest slight, the smallest suggestion that you might be wrong becomes an existential attack. You spend your days defending a fortress that's always on the brink of collapse because it's built on denial, not truth. But imagine for a moment laying it down, setting aside the heavy burden of needing to appear flawless. What would happen if you could simply say, I don't know, I failed, I need help, I was wrong? You might discover that the ground doesn't swallow you up, that people draw closer, not further away. That growth, real growth, begins precisely at the point where pride ends. Because pride is loud, but growth is quiet. Pride blusters, growth listens. Pride demands obedience to the status quo of who you think you are. Growth humbly dismantles it, brick by brick, so something stronger, freer, more honest can be built in its place. And just consider, what if that's what the next manipulation counts on? What if the very logic you trust, the reasoning you cherish, is simply the newest disguise for a manipulation you can't even see yet? Have you ever noticed how logic is so often dressed up as a knight in shining armor, promising to rescue you from confusion, chaos, and deceit? It's seductive because logic feels clean, sharp, and unassailable. If something makes logical sense, surely it must be true. Right. But that's where the real danger begins. Because logic, stripped of scrutiny, becomes the perfect disguise for manipulation. And the more rational it sounds, the easier it is to swallow without question. Imagine someone telling you, it's only logical to prioritize economic growth over environmental concerns. After all, people need jobs, families need stability, nations need prosperity. It sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? You nod along because who could argue against putting food on the table? But buried in that tidy argument is an unspoken trade-off, an acceptance that irreversible damage to the planet is a tolerable consequence. Logic becomes the polite mask for exploitation. Or take another example, closer to home. Have you ever found yourself trapped in an argument where someone systematically dismantles your feelings with bulletproof reasoning? They lay out points A through Z, each connecting flawlessly, leaving you with no logical footing to stand on. And yet, deep down, something still feels wrong. That's the trick. Logic can be sculpted to any end if the premises are chosen carefully enough. It doesn't matter how flawless the conclusion seems, if the foundation itself was laid by someone with an agenda. Think about advertising. It only makes sense to upgrade your phone. Look at all the advanced features. Why settle for less when you can have more? The logic here is airtight, except it ignores the fact that your current phone works perfectly well, that the constant push for upgrades feeds a cycle of waste and financial strain. Logic isn't lying to you outright, it's simply shining its spotlight on selected facts while keeping the inconvenient ones in the dark. This is why logic is such an effective tool for manipulation. It offers a clear path, a comforting structure. It spares you from the messy tangle of intuition and emotion, which are harder to quantify and thus easier to dismiss. If you challenge the logical structure, you're branded irrational, overly emotional, or simply ignorant. So you learn to silence your gut, to mistrust your instincts, and to bow before the altar of reason. Political rhetoric thrives on this. Leaders frame drastic policies in logical terms. For national security, we must give up certain freedoms. It's a simple trade-off, safety over privacy. Who wouldn't want to be safe? The logic is pristine, and so surveillance grows, personal liberties shrink, all under the banner of perfectly rational decisions. Logic did not protect you here. It betrayed you by offering a justification that sounded too coherent to resist. Consider also how logic is wielded in personal relationships. The manipulator who says, "If you truly loved me, you'd do this for me. It's only reasonable, I've done so much for you." Their argument is impeccably logical, constructed to box you into compliance. You find yourself nodding, ashamed of your reluctance, because how could you argue against logic? But love isn't a balance sheet. Affection can't be reduced to transactional exchanges. And yet, dressed in logical terms, manipulation becomes almost invisible. Here's the most disturbing part. Once logic has done its work, you become your own enforcer. You repeat these logical scripts in your head. You rationalize mistreatment. You justify compromises that gnaw at your soul. You convince yourself that everything adds up, because logically it does. Meanwhile, what you feel is quietly strangled. What you truly desire, fear or need, becomes irrelevant under the tyranny of flawless reasoning. So next time someone presents you with a logical argument that seems unassailable, pause, ask who built this logic, whose interests it serves, and what silent assumptions lie at its core. Ask what truths are conveniently left out. Because logic is a tool, powerful, yes, but neutral. In the hands of the cunning, it doesn't reveal truth, it conceals manipulation. And while you're pondering that, consider this. Why do the tiniest missteps in your life often swell into overwhelming disasters inside your mind? Have you ever noticed how the smallest failures seem to tower over you, casting shadows far larger than they deserve? A missed deadline, a slip of the tongue, a moment of hesitation that no one else even registers, yet inside your mind, it's a cataclysm. You replay it endlessly, like a tragic epic that seals your fate. Why does a tiny stumble feel like tumbling off a cliff? Because your brain is wired not for fairness, but for survival. Long ago, a minor mistake, like underestimating a predator's speed, could mean death. Your nervous system still clings to that logic, treating harmless missteps with the same adrenaline-fueled panic. That awkward pause in conversation. Your heart races as if you've been cornered. Your mind catastrophizes, drawing out worst-case scenarios in vivid, merciless detail. But it's not just biology, it's also the stories you tell yourself. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed a dangerous myth that your worth hinges on flawless performance, that even a tiny crack exposes your entire foundation. And so when you forget a friend's birthday or stumble during a presentation, it's not simply a human slip, it becomes evidence. Evidence that you're inadequate, careless, maybe even unworthy. Small failures become monstrous because you feed them with your own self-judgment. Think about how easily this happens. You send a message and don't get a reply. Minutes stretch into hours, then days. Your mind doesn't whisper calm possibilities. It screams rejection. You convince yourself you've said something wrong, that you've driven someone away, that this silence is a damning verdict on who you are. Meanwhile, the other person might simply be busy, overwhelmed, or lost in their own labyrinth of anxieties. Your catastrophic imagination fills in gaps with your worst fears. And notice how this process is rarely balanced. When something goes right, when you succeed, when someone praises you, it flickers briefly, then fades. You brush it off, telling yourself it's just luck or that it doesn't really count. But when something goes wrong, it carves deep grooves into your memory, replayed over and over like a punishment. You create a lopsided narrative, weighted heavily with failures, each small misstep stacking on the last until it feels like a crushing wall. Why do we cling so fiercely to this? Partly because self-criticism masquerades as self-improvement. You believe that if you're hard enough on yourself, you'll avoid future mistakes. That fear will keep you sharp, disciplined, better prepared. But more often, it only creates paralysis. You become so terrified of failing again that you stop taking chances altogether. Your world shrinks. Opportunities pass you by because the risk of another tiny catastrophe feels unbearable. Society doesn't help. It thrives on highlighting perfection and punishing imperfection. Social media is a carefully curated gallery of triumphs, making your small stumbles seem grotesque by comparison. You see flawless vacations, effortless achievements, endless celebrations, and your minor failures morph into towering monstrosities in the shadow of these illusions. But here's the truth. Your catastrophizing mind doesn't want you to see small failures are inevitable. They're part of being alive. Everyone forgets, slips, falters. The difference isn't who avoids mistakes, it's who refuses to let those mistakes define them. Who learns to see a stumble, not as a personal doom, but as a momentary misstep on a far longer path. So the next time your mind blows a tiny error into a looming disaster, pause. Ask yourself, is this really catastrophic, or is it just uncomfortable? Does this one moment truly deserve to eclipse everything else about you? And what would you say to a friend who made the same mistake? Would you condemn them, or remind them of their countless moments of grace, humor, and resilience? Because maybe it's time to extend that same compassion inward, to understand that small failures are just that. Small. They loom only because you let them, and you're allowed to shrink them back to size. And yet, even as you find your footing, there's a quieter danger waiting. Doubt loves to whisper right when you feel strongest. Curious how it slips in, isn't it? Have you ever noticed that doubt doesn't strike hardest when you're down, but when you're finally standing tall, when your hands grip the edge of a long-climbed peak, when your lungs are full of victory's thin, exhilarating air? That's exactly when doubt decides to whisper. It doesn't shout, doesn't crash in like a storm. It slithers close, breathes warm uncertainty against your ear, and makes you question whether you belong here at all. It's strange, isn't it? You'd expect doubt to hound you when you're failing, when you're stumbling through dark valleys. But in those moments, there's almost a twisted comfort. Of course you doubt yourself. Look at the struggle. Look at the mess. You accept it because failure seems like the rightful breeding ground for insecurity. But when you're succeeding, when all signs point to triumph, that's when doubt's whisper is most poisonous. Because it doesn't just challenge your effort, it challenges your very right to be proud. Think about the last time you accomplished something that actually mattered to you. Maybe it was landing a dream job, starting a family, standing on a stage, or simply daring to change your life in a way others feared. You felt strong, capable, briefly, gloriously untouchable. But then, like a tiny crack in a mirror, doubt formed. Are you sure you deserve this? What if they discover you're a fraud? What if this was luck, timing, a fluke, anything but earned? It's insidious how the mind undermines itself, especially in moments meant to be unclouded by fear. The psychological term is imposter syndrome, but that label almost sterilizes it, makes it sound like a minor bug in your programming. In truth, it's an invasive parasite. It feeds off your brightest moments, your hardest-won victories, draining the sweetness out of them until you're left clutching hollow achievements that feel like borrowed trophies. Because doubt isn't just about ability. It attacks identity. It doesn't say, maybe that was a difficult task. It says, maybe you're not the kind of person who was ever meant to succeed. It tries to rewrite your story while you're still living it, convincing you your happiest chapters were editing errors, waiting to be corrected. And here's where it gets even darker. Doubt often masquerades as humility. It tells you to be cautious, to stay modest, to question your right to be happy, because, surely, others deserve it more. It warns you not to grow arrogant, but in doing so, it robs you of a healthy sense of self-respect. It keeps your head bowed so you never see how far you've actually come. Worse still, doubt thrives on isolation. It whispers in private. It catches you alone in quiet moments, when there's no one to argue on your behalf. It knows that in the echo chamber of your mind, its voice grows louder. Without contradiction, doubt becomes the dominant narrative. Your triumphs get reinterpreted as accidents, your strengths as coincidences, your dreams as naive overreaches destined to crumble. But maybe the cruelest trick of all is that doubt is often right there because you've stepped into territory that matters. You don't doubt things that are meaningless to you. You doubt the things tied to your deepest hopes, your boldest ambitions, your most intimate desires. That's why it feels so sharp. That's why it cuts exactly where it hurts the most. So if doubt is whispering right now, if it's circling your hard-won joy, trying to convince you you're unworthy, pause and look at it differently. Doubt might just be a crude indicator of significance. Proof that you're in territory important enough to scare you. That fear is the price of stepping beyond what you thought was possible. But remember this too, doubt is rarely a prophet. It predicts catastrophe that almost never arrives. It tells stories of humiliation that never unfold. It urges you to shrink, retreat, to stand safely inside old familiar lines. Because if you do that, doubt stays comfortable, unchallenged. But your life, it stays small, so maybe it's time to let doubt whisper. Let it murmur its tired scripts, and keep going anyway. Because in the end, doubt's power isn't in its words, it's in your willingness to believe them, and you don't have to. Not today. Speaking of beliefs, have you ever wondered why the opinions of others can drown out your own sense of truth, even when you know they're wrong? Have you ever caught yourself changing the way you talk, the way you laugh, even the way you think, just to fit into someone else's expectations? It happens so effortlessly that you hardly notice it. Like a chameleon, blending into its surroundings, you adjust, you bend, you mold yourself until you can't quite remember the shape you started with. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. What others believe about you often weighs more heavily than the truth you hold inside. You might tell yourself you don't care what people think, that their opinions are just noise. But your body betrays you. Notice the flush of embarrassment when criticized, the spark of pleasure when praised, the tightening of your chest when you're misunderstood. We are wired biologically, socially, even evolutionarily, to crave acceptance. To be cast out from the group once meant death. So we learn to place immense value on being seen the right way. And that desperate need, it's exploited constantly. Advertisers thrive on it, promising products that make you more likable, more attractive, more worthy. Social media multiplies it 1,000 times over, turning your life into a stage where the audience's applause or silence decides your worth. You post something honest, raw, something that feels like the real you, and the likes trickle in slowly. You feel it immediately, like a subtle shame. Then you share something shallow, safe, and the algorithm rewards you. Suddenly, your brain floods with dopamine, teaching you, training you to betray your truth for the approval of strangers. It's not just strangers either. Think of your parents' expectations, your friends' opinions, your partner's silent judgments. Even your enemies have power over you because you imagine them laughing, scoffing, picking apart your flaws. So you build a persona, piece by careful piece, a mask sculpted from their collective opinions. Then you start living through that mask, forgetting where it ends, and you begin. This is why you hesitate to chase certain dreams, why you hold back unpopular opinions, why you apologize for things you shouldn't be sorry for. Because in some dark corner of your mind, their perception of you is more real than your own. Their belief shapes your reality. Their approval feels like oxygen. But here's where it gets especially cruel. People's opinions are fickle, shallow, and often based on misunderstandings or projections that have nothing to do with you. They're distracted by their own insecurities, their own dramas, barely paying attention. And yet, these fragile, transient thoughts dictate how you live. You sacrifice your authenticity on an altar of arbitrary approval. Consider how differently you might live if you genuinely prioritized your own truth over external opinions. Imagine the risks you'd take, the words you'd speak, the relationships you'd leave behind or finally embrace. The sheer freedom of it almost feels dangerous, because without the weight of others' judgments, you'd be untethered, terrifyingly accountable only to yourself. That's why people cling to external validation. It gives them direction, even if it's a prison. Being shaped by others' opinions means never having to define yourself from scratch. It's easier to let the crowd dictate your worth than to stand alone and declare it for yourself. But every time you let their opinions outweigh your truth, a part of you dims, a small death happens inside, a quiet, unnoticed burial of who you really are. And over time, those buried pieces accumulate, until one day you wake up and realize you're living someone else's life, haunted by the ghost of the person you might have been. Ask yourself, how many of your choices are truly yours? How much of your life is lived for their gaze, their approval, their stories about who you are? And what would it take to finally decide that your truth, no matter how flawed or raw or misunderstood, matters more? Hold on to that question, because next we're going to explore how the external judgments you absorb don't just shape your thoughts, they become the very currency of your self-worth. Have you ever noticed how quickly the opinions of others seep beneath your skin? It starts small. A stray comment, a raised eyebrow, a subtle shift in someone's tone. And suddenly, without meaning to, you're adjusting, reshaping your words, your expressions, even your ambitions, just to avoid that sting of external disapproval. Before you know it, external judgment isn't just something you experience. It becomes the very foundation of your worth. Think about how early this starts. As a child, your identity forms in the mirrored reactions of the adults around you. Their praise makes you beam, their disappointment makes you shrink. You learn to smile wider, speak softer, perform better, all so you can keep earning that fleeting stamp of approval. Slowly, almost invisibly, your inner compass is replaced by a crowd's shifting applause. It only gets worse as you grow older. School grades aren't merely feedback, they're verdicts on your intelligence. Social circles aren't just friends, they're juries evaluating your worthiness. You start to measure yourself by their reactions. Did they laugh at your joke, nod at your opinion, invite you in, or edge you out? Each interaction becomes a referendum on your value. Then comes adulthood, where careers amplify the tyranny of external judgment. Your job title, your salary, your accolades, these aren't just professional markers, they become proxies for your inherent value. You parade them around like armor, terrified of what people might see if you stripped them away. Who would you be if not for the metrics stamped on your life by other people's standards? Worse still, our entire culture weaponizes this dependence on external validation. Social media thrives on it. Likes, shares, comments, the perpetual scoreboard of public approval. Every post, every selfie, every clever remark is bait cast into a sea of judgment, hoping for bites that will momentarily swell your fragile sense of self. But what happens when those bites don't come? When your efforts are met with silence or worse, disdain? You begin to question not just what you did, but who you are. Because when your worth is externally sourced, any rejection feels like an indictment of your entire being. A cold shoulder doesn't just bruise your ego, it fractures the very scaffolding of your self-esteem. This is how external judgment becomes your worth. Not through grand declarations or obvious oppression, but through tiny, relentless recalibrations of your identity to fit other people's preferences. You stop asking, "What do I believe?" and start obsessing over, "What will they think?" You sacrifice authenticity for acceptance, depth for decoration, truth for applause. And here's the darkest part. This dependence makes you easy to control. Society doesn't need chains or threats when it has your deep-seated fear of disapproval. It only needs to set the standards, what beauty looks like, what success sounds like, what happiness should be. You'll do the rest yourself. You'll police your own thoughts, tailor your own dreams, mold your own behaviors to fit the ever-changing molds laid out for you. Isn't that horrifying? That your life's trajectory could be guided not by your desires or convictions, but by the echo of other people's opinions. That the core of who you are might be nothing more than a patchwork of other people's expectations, stitched together by your desperate need to be approved of, liked, validated. You might tell yourself you're immune, that you don't care what people think. But be honest, how often do you adjust your words mid-sentence because you sense disapproval? How often do you hide parts of yourself for fear they'll be mocked or dismissed? How often do you choose safety over sincerity, applause over authenticity? Recognizing this is brutal. It means admitting that much of what you believe about yourself isn't even yours. It's a mosaic of external judgments you've mistaken for your own reflection. But that recognition is also the first painful step toward reclaiming your worth from the hands of others. Because your value was never supposed to be a communal decision. It was never meant to hinge on nods, claps, or silent approvals. Worth isn't a vote. It's an internal truth, quiet, steadfast, and utterly independent of external judgment. The tragedy is how few people ever get to feel that. How most live and die chained to perceptions they can't control, chasing validation that was never meant to define them. And if that unsettles you, good, because in the next breath we'll explore something even more chilling. Why those rare moments of genuine joy and triumph you might have once had often slip away, leaving little behind but a hollow ache. Have you ever noticed how the good times slip away from your memory like water through your fingers? When you try to hold on to them, they scatter fragments of laughter, a fleeting embrace, the glow of a perfect afternoon sun. You remember you were happy, but the feeling itself is strangely hollow, like looking at a photograph of a meal long after the hunger has gone. It's unsettling how vividly you can recall your worst moments, yet the sweetest days blur, dissolve and vanish. Why does the mind work this way? It's because your brain, cunning and pragmatic, is designed not for joy, but for survival. It tags moments of pain, fear, humiliation, and loss as critical data. These memories are tattooed deep into your psyche, kept sharp and close at hand to protect you from repeating old mistakes. Meanwhile, happiness is catalogued as non-essential background noise, soft and forgettable. Your mind simply doesn't prioritize it. Think about the last time you sat with family or friends, feeling genuinely at ease. Where is that sensation now? Try to summon it. Try to make it real again. It's elusive, slippery. All that remains is the intellectual acknowledgement that it happened, a thin ghost of something once vivid. Contrast that with the sting of a cruel word or the cold grip of panic. You can relive those instantly, with punishing clarity. There's a cruel irony here. The The times that reassure you life is worth living. Those are the very moments your brain fails to preserve in full color. Meanwhile, your regrets, your humiliations, your terrors, they thrive, nurtured by neural circuits that treat them as sacred warnings. You become a vault of your own suffering, while your joys are reduced to delicate ashes, blown away by the smallest breeze. Some of this is evolutionary baggage, the ancestors who obsessed over danger, who replayed their traumas in relentless mental loops, were the ones who survived long enough to pass on their vigilant brains. Those who basked in bliss without caution often didn't live to tell the tale. Nature doesn't care if you're happy. It only cares if you're alert, wary, prepared. And so you inherit this bias, this unbalanced ledger, where threats and failures gain interest over time, while happiness depreciates almost immediately. You think of it as normal because it's common, but normal isn't the same as healthy. You're left chasing experiences, collecting new pleasures, hoping they'll fill the void. But no matter how bright the moment, it fades. You're built to forget. Maybe you compensate by taking photos, recording videos, writing journals, tiny desperate acts of preservation. But even then, what are you really capturing? An image, a sound, a handful of words, the feeling itself, that rush of lightness in your chest, the effortless safety of belonging is lost. When you revisit those memories, it's like peering through glass at something you can't quite touch. Nostalgia stirs, sweet and painful, a reminder that the moment itself is irretrievable. And perhaps that's the secret reason why you chase novelty so frantically. You're hoping that the next good time will be different, will finally stick, will imprint itself with the same gravity as your sorrows. But it never does. Joy is a moving target, and your mind is a poor archivist of your own contentment. This imbalance can quietly shape your entire outlook. Because your pain is so vivid and your joy so faint, you begin to believe life is mostly suffering, punctuated by tiny flickers of relief. You lose perspective. You prepare endlessly for more hurt, more failure, more loss, because that's what feels most real, most certain. Meanwhile, the beauty in your life passes by, almost unnoticed, until it's too late to grasp it. But there's a darker layer still. When the good times vanish from memory, it makes you easier to control. You're more likely to accept a grim status quo, more likely to stay compliant, because your internal story is dominated by caution and loss. You underestimate how much joy you've truly lived, how much strength those moments of peace once gave you. You see life through a distorted lens of selective memory, and it quietly dictates your choices. So ask yourself, what might change if your mind treasured joy the way it treasures pain? What if you could recall each smile, each triumph, each breathless moment of wonder with the same searing clarity as your worst nights? What kind of life would that build? Of course, your brain won't do this for you. You have to train it, deliberately, stubbornly, to hold on to the light. Not by denying the dark, but by refusing to let it be the only story you tell yourself. And as you wonder about the strange vanishing of your own happiness, consider this. What if the next mental trap isn't about forgetting joy, but about how even discomfort itself starts to masquerade as a reward? Have you ever noticed how quickly your brain rewards you for retreating from discomfort? It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there like a sly whisper, promising safety if you just look away. Imagine you're standing at the edge of an awkward confrontation or staring down the barrel of a life decision that fills you with dread. Your chest tightens, your hands fidget, your thoughts scramble for an exit. And then relief. The moment you decide to step back, to postpone, to avoid, the tension uncoils. A small hit of pleasure floods your mind. You've been rewarded, not for facing the problem, but for running from it. This is how discomfort avoidance becomes its own twisted prize. Your brain lights up each time you slip out of pain's grip. Like a lab rat pressing a lever for sugar pellets, you start seeking that tiny high again and again. You dodge the hard conversation. You scroll past the unsettling news story. You rationalize why today isn't the day to start the difficult project. And each time, the soothing wave washes over you, reinforcing the pattern. Avoidance feels good, so you do it more. Over time, this doesn't just become a habit, it becomes a strategy, a warped coping mechanism, masquerading as self-care. Your mind starts constructing clever narratives to protect you from discomfort's sting. Why bother speaking up? It won't change anything. Maybe I'm overreacting. Better to stay quiet. I'll deal with it tomorrow. Tomorrow will be better. Notice how gentle these thoughts sound, like lullabies rocking you into complacency. But here's the darker layer. Every time you choose comfort over challenge, ease over friction, you teach yourself that pain is intolerable. You shrink your threshold for struggle, tightening the walls of your life. What starts as momentary relief calcifies into fear, fear of growth, fear of truth, fear of confronting who you really are. You start curating your world to minimize any spark of discomfort, staying in the job that bores you, the relationship that depletes you, the beliefs that shelter you from unsettling doubts. And your mind rewards you with quiet relief every time you turn away. There's a reason the system loves this. Discomfort avoidant people are predictable, pliable, easily entertained, and seldom revolutionary. You become less likely to confront injustice, less likely to demand more of yourself or the world. Instead, you slip into well-oiled grooves, laid out by others, pacified by distractions and low-stakes pleasures. Streaming services, fast food, online shopping, all tiny comfort buttons you can press to keep the deeper aches at bay. And each press comes with a dopamine pat on the head. Good job. Stay right here. Even your sense of identity starts bending around this pattern. You tell yourself you're just not confrontational, or that you prefer to keep the peace. But often that's code for avoiding the discomfort that comes with asserting your needs, challenging your assumptions, or enduring temporary pain for long-term change. The cost of this avoidance is hidden at first. But look closely and you'll see it everywhere in opportunities missed, connections hollowed by unspoken truths, passions abandoned because they were too hard or too uncertain. This is the paradox that stings the most. The more you reward yourself for sidestepping discomfort, the more discomfort grows in power. It becomes this looming spectre, exaggerated by avoidance, haunting you with all the things you never dared to face. Meanwhile, the real discomfort, the raw, jagged kind that leads to breakthroughs, stays locked behind doors you've trained yourself never to open. And this isn't just about the big stuff. It's woven into everyday choices, like when you instinctively pick up your phone the moment boredom strikes, or when you default to cynicism instead of admitting you're scared, or when you keep conversations shallow to dodge vulnerability. Each tiny decision deposits another coin into the slot machine of avoidance, paying out brief comfort at the expense of long-term freedom. Because real freedom doesn't live in the absence of discomfort. It lives in your willingness to feel it, fully, courageously, without immediately seeking escape. Discomfort is where your dormant possibilities stretch and yawn awake. It's where growth breathes. It's where the boundaries of who you think you are get tested and redrawn. So the next time you catch yourself retreating, pause. Notice that fleeting surge of relief. Recognize it not as a gift, but as a bribe, your brain's desperate attempt to keep you small and safe. And then decide if that safety is truly worth the price. Because the most unsettling truth is this: every time you avoid discomfort, you're choosing a reward that keeps you exactly where you are. But lean into it, sit in the unease, and you might just earn something far greater than relief. You might earn your own transformation. And speaking of transformations, wait until you see how your own thoughts betray you. Because afterthoughts have a way of sabotaging your choices in ways you've never dared to imagine. Picture the last time you made a choice, any choice at all. Maybe it was small, like what to eat for lunch. Maybe it was life-altering, like whether to end a relationship or switch careers. In that moment, you probably believed you were acting freely, driven by instinct, reason, or some quiet alignment of values. But what you likely overlooked was the ambush waiting for you afterward. The ambush of afterthoughts. Afterthoughts are those sneaky little whispers that appear only once a decision is already sealed. They dress themselves up as wisdom, hindsight, moral insight. They show up with smug little smirks, poking holes in your resolve, making you second-guess what moments ago felt certain. They say, "Should you really have done that? Or what will people think of you now? Or the worst of all, who do you think you are to make that choice?" Here's the insidious trick. Afterthoughts sabotage your choices, not by stopping you ahead of time, but by poisoning your memory of them. They rewrite the narrative of why you acted, painting your confidence as arrogance, your clarity as ignorance. They slip into your mind like a whispering parasite, feeding off your self-doubt, turning clean lines into tangled knots. Consider how often you replay your decisions, long after they're made, dissecting them under a microscope you never applied beforehand. That party you declined to protect your mental health. Now you wonder if people see you as distant. That confrontation at work you handled calmly. Now you worry you seem too passive, or maybe too aggressive. Your mind rummages through endless what-ifs, fabricating regret out of thin air. The result: you start losing trust in yourself. Why does this happen? Because afterthoughts have one brutal purpose: to keep you in check, to mold you into something predictable, hesitant, easy to manage. They hijack your courage by loading even your smallest choices with fear of future self-recrimination. This internal sabotage ensures that next time you might not even make the choice at all. You'll stay quiet, compliant, uncontroversial, safe. But safe for whom? Not for you. Safe for the system around you. A person tangled in their own self-critique is easy to guide, easy to guilt, easy to keep exactly where they are. Imagine a dog trained with an invisible fence. It learns to stay put, not because of any current shock, but because of the haunting memory of one. Afterthoughts are your invisible shocks, conditioning you to avoid stepping out of line again. Now think deeper. Your afterthoughts aren't neutral commentators. They're born from your upbringing, your culture, your trauma, your insecurities. They carry the voices of disappointed parents, strict teachers, judgmental peers, and an entire society that thrives when you question yourself instead of it. When your decisions serve only to spark anxiety afterward, you become paralyzed by fear of your own inner courtroom. And what's the most tragic irony? Often your original choice was exactly right. It was clean, instinctive, aligned with your needs. But afterthoughts muddy the water so effectively that you no longer know if your instincts are even worth listening to. You start delegating your decision-making to anxiety, hoping that constant scrutiny might prevent mistakes. In truth, it only ensures paralysis. This is why so many people seem stuck, hesitant, full of unexpressed desires. They aren't lacking opportunity or intelligence. They're simply crushed under the weight of their own afterthoughts, afraid that any move forward will haunt them later with a relentless internal cross-examination. Their choices become smaller, safer, until one day they look back and wonder when exactly they stopped truly living. So next time you make a choice, pay attention to what happens after. Watch for the chorus of afterthoughts that tries to undermine you, whispering all the ways you might have been wrong. Recognize them for what they are: ghosts with no authority. Remind yourself that your choice was made with the best information and intentions you had at the time. Let that be enough. Otherwise, you'll spend your life rewriting your own history, never allowing yourself to move forward without dragging a ball and chain of imagined regrets. And ask yourself this chilling question: if your own mind can so easily sabotage you after the fact, what other seemingly harmless instincts might actually be silent agents of control? Which brings us straight into the next unsettling idea: why obedience feels so much like safety. Picture yourself at the edge of a crowd, peering nervously over shoulders, waiting for someone else to move first. There's a peculiar comfort in standing there, in blending in, because as long as you're part of the crowd, quiet, compliant, faceless, nothing singles you out, you're safe. Or at least that's the illusion obedience offers you. It dresses itself in the soothing language of protection, community, and order. It promises that if you just follow the rules, keep your head down, and do what's expected, you'll be spared from chaos and danger. But beneath that promise lurks something far darker. Obedience feels like a shield. You obey traffic laws, you follow workplace protocols, you listen to doctors. All of this keeps life smooth and predictable. It's easy to confuse that predictability with genuine security. You tell yourself you're careful, responsible, good. But look closer. Obedience isn't the same as safety. It's just a mechanism to avoid consequences, and often to avoid thinking too deeply. Because questioning is risky. Challenging norms invites scrutiny, and scrutiny feels perilous. So obedience stands in, masquerading as a virtue, whispering that you're safer when you don't make waves. This is how entire societies slide quietly into atrocity. When enough people decide that it's better to obey than to disrupt, that it's safer to look the other way than confront what's wrong. Think of soldiers who commit horrors because they were just following orders. Think of citizens who watch their neighbors disappear and rationalize it as the cost of order. Their obedience didn't keep them safe, it simply made them complicit, numb to the creeping rot. On a personal level, obedience seeps into your everyday life in subtler, insidious ways. At work, you agree to unreasonable demands, not because they're fair, but because you fear what resistance might cost you. You nod along in meetings, endorse decisions you know are flawed, because standing up might isolate you. Your obedience shields you from conflict. Yes, but it also locks you into patterns that chip away at your integrity. Even socially, you obey expectations. You dress the way others do, laugh at jokes you don't find funny, hide parts of yourself that might provoke disapproval. You follow unwritten scripts because deviation feels like exposure, and exposure feels like danger. In these moments, obedience promises belonging. It reassures you that if you just conform, you'll be accepted, maybe even loved. But that acceptance is fragile, built on your willingness to betray yourself. Governments, corporations, even your own peer groups exploit this. They paint obedience as moral, noble, something responsible people do. They tell you to trust the system, trust the plan, trust them. They inflate your fear of uncertainty. So obedience feels like the only reasonable choice. The more you buy into it, the more your personal agency erodes. You stop asking hard questions, stop exploring uncomfortable truths, stop imagining alternatives. Obedience becomes your default, and you confuse its dull comfort with genuine security. But here's the brutal irony: obedience doesn't actually keep you safe. It just delays the reckoning. You might avoid short-term discomfort, dodge immediate punishment, maintain superficial peace. But in the long run, blind obedience leaves you vulnerable to exploitation, manipulation, and collective harm. By the time you realize the system you trusted was never designed to protect you, only itself, it's often too late to reclaim your power without enormous cost. Imagine how differently things might play out if you recognized that safety doesn't come from obedience. It comes from awareness, discernment, and courage. From being willing to stand apart when necessary, to question narratives, to hold your ground even when it's uncomfortable. It's riskier in the moment, sure, but it's the only real safeguard against becoming a pawn in someone else's game. So the next time obedience whispers sweet promises of safety, pause and examine who truly benefits from your compliance. Is it you, or is it the person, institution, or system that thrives when you stop thinking critically? The comfort of obedience is a temporary salve, not a lasting shield. It keeps you small, manageable, predictable, easy to herd. And in a world that feeds on passive conformity, your obedient silence is its favorite currency. Ask yourself, would you rather feel safe and be controlled, or feel uneasy and be free? That tension, that choice, is where your real security lies, not in the hollow assurances of obedience, but in the unpredictable, exhilarating territory of your own independent mind. And yet, have you noticed how fear seems to slip in, right when a new door cracks open, cloaking opportunity in shadows? What if the next great chapter of your life is hiding just beyond a door labeled fear? Think about it. How many times have you felt a spark of curiosity or excitement, only for it to be smothered by a tight, creeping anxiety in your chest? New opportunities shimmer on the horizon, bright and inviting, but the closer you step, the more that glow seems to twist into something ominous. Fear wraps its fingers around your throat, whispering reasons to stay exactly where you are. Maybe it tells you you're not ready yet, that you need more time, more skills, more certainty. Maybe it dredges up old embarrassments, playing them on repeat like a cruel home movie. Remember when you failed before? Remember how foolish you felt, how exposed. Better to stay here, in the safety of the familiar, even if the familiar is quietly suffocating you. Fear is clever. It disguises itself as caution, as responsibility, even as wisdom. It convinces you to overthink until the opportunity fades, until the door rusts shut. It feeds you horror stories of what could go wrong. You could embarrass yourself. You could lose money. You could be hurt. You could discover you're not nearly as capable as you hope. And so you retreat. Soothe yourself with comfortable routines and promise that you'll try next time. But next time rarely comes, because fear has already learned exactly how to stop you. It knows your pressure points, your deepest insecurities. It knows how to build castles out of tiny doubts. And so every new possibility becomes a haunted house you refuse to enter. What's worse is that fear often wraps itself in moral clothing. It says, be grateful for what you have. Don't be greedy. Don't risk what's stable. So you shrink your ambitions. You dull your desires. You stay in the same job, the same town, the same cramped vision of who you're allowed to be, telling yourself it's noble, when really it's just safe. But look closer. You'll see that every life-altering breakthrough was preceded by fear, not the absence of it. the trembling, heart-racing confrontation with it. People don't achieve profound things because they're fearless. They achieve them because they step forward, in spite of fear, hands shaking, voice cracking, taking the risk that maybe, just maybe, the reward is worth the terror. And even when it goes wrong, even when you stumble and bleed and fail spectacularly, you'll learn that fear is like a ghost. The more you face it, the more it loses substance. You might find that humiliation doesn't kill you, that disappointment can be survived, that trying and failing often feels less painful than never trying at all. So ask yourself, is it truly danger that holds you back? Or is it the idea of being uncomfortable, exposed, unshielded from your own vulnerability? Because that discomfort is temporary, but the regret of a life unlived is permanent. You are here, breathing, with 1,000 possible versions of yourself waiting to be born. And each one stands on the other side of fear, waving at you to cross over. So maybe the next time fear tells you to stand still, you'll feel the flutter of something else too. A stubborn little spark, whispering, "What if? What if you tried, failed, and grew stronger? What if you tried, succeeded, and your life expanded beyond anything you ever imagined? What if the worst thing that happens is simply that you prove to yourself that you're brave? Hold on to that. Because fear will always be there, lurking at the edges of your dreams. But courage can be there too, if you let it. And every time you choose courage over comfort, you pry open another door to who you could become. But speaking of doors, what happens when someone discovers the tender places in your heart and twists them for their own gain? Keep listening, because empathy can turn into manipulation in ways you might never expect. Picture someone gently taking your hand, looking into your eyes with such raw, aching sympathy that it melts your defenses. They listen, nod, offer soft words that feel like balm on a wound. In that moment, your guard drops completely. You trust them. Maybe you even start to believe they understand you better than anyone ever has. But what if that tender moment isn't what it seems? What if it's the first thread in a web designed not to comfort you, but to bind you? Empathy is supposed to be this glowing virtue, isn't it? The ability to feel another person's pain, to step inside their skin and ache with them. It's the bedrock of compassion, the engine of mercy. Yet, like anything powerful, empathy has a darker side, because when someone can feel your emotions, they can also learn to steer them. They sense your fears, your insecurities, your deepest needs, and they begin to mold themselves around those tender places. They know exactly where to press. Manipulators love empathy. They wield it like a scalpel, delicately slicing through your mental barriers. They offer comfort, but only to secure influence. They show concern, but only to deepen dependence. Every time they mirror your feelings, echo your struggles, or whisper that they'd never judge you, it's a subtle rehearsal of control. You become more pliable, more willing to overlook red flags, more likely to forgive transgressions, because look how much they care, or seem to. Think of the way a skilled manipulator frames their needs as fragile little things, so easily bruised by your reluctance. They lean on your empathy like a crutch. If you refuse, it feels like cruelty. If you step back, it feels like betrayal. They don't need to demand outright. Your own empathetic instincts twist the knife for them. You police yourself, soften your voice, lower your standards, just to spare their feelings. And guilt. Guilt becomes the sharpest tool. Have you ever felt that gnawing sickness in your stomach when someone says, "I thought you understood me," or "I never expected you to be like everyone else"? They don't have to raise their voice, just a pained look, a wounded sigh, and suddenly you're scrambling to soothe them, to prove your compassion. They've hijacked your empathy, turned it inward, made it your burden to keep them from hurting. It's a quiet horror, realizing how easily empathy becomes a leash. Because the person twisting it doesn't have to be malicious in a cartoonish sense. They may truly feel pain. They may genuinely need you. But empathy without boundaries isn't virtue, it's surrender. It gives them the script to write your lines, to direct your stage marks, until your entire role becomes caretaking their emotions at the expense of your own. And when you finally do recognize the manipulation, the cruelty of it bites deep, because it wasn't brute force that bent you. It was kindness, or at least the performance of it. That's why it stays with you, echoing in your mind late at night, how something so tender could become so coercive. It makes you question your instincts, doubt your willingness to open up again. It stains not just them, but your very concept of connection. So where does that leave you? It leaves you wary, scanning for subtle shifts in tone, small recalibrations meant to tug at your sympathies. It means learning to pause when you feel that urgent pull to fix someone else's pain, to ask whether their hurt has become a trap. It means holding your empathy in strong, discerning hands, still offered freely, but never forfeited. Because the tragedy isn't just that empathy can be twisted into manipulation. It's that you might begin to resent your own capacity to care, to see it as a flaw instead of a gift. Don't let them take that from you. Protect it, shape it with wisdom, but never extinguish it. Empathy deserves better than to be turned into a weapon, by them or by your own fear. And speaking of fear, what happens when silence isn't just self-protection, but becomes its own form of complicity? Imagine standing in a crowded room where something terrible is happening. Maybe someone is being humiliated. Maybe they're being hurt. You see it. You know it's wrong. And yet, your mouth stays shut. Your feet stay planted. You wait for someone else to intervene, someone braver, someone louder, but no one does. The room falls silent, except for the cruelty echoing through it. And you, by doing nothing, become part of that silence. That's the dark alchemy of silence. It transforms bystanders into accomplices. It doesn't matter that you didn't throw the first insult or land the first blow. Your silence cushions the cruelty. It gives it space to grow, because in that moment, your lack of objection is interpreted as permission. That's how silence becomes complicity. It's a soft nod to the abuser, a subtle shrug that says, "Go ahead." This isn't just about obvious violence. It's about the countless small moments you witness every day. Racist jokes told at dinner tables, casual cruelty at work, gossip that slices through reputations. Each time you tell yourself it's not your business, that it's too awkward to speak up, that it's easier to just keep quiet, you're lending your silence as armor to the wrong side. Silence may feel neutral, but in a moral conflict, it always tilts toward the oppressor. But why is silence so tempting? Because speaking up risks your own comfort. It might cost you friendships, your standing at work, the smooth texture of social life. When you open your mouth to challenge wrongdoing, you invite friction. You draw the spotlight, expose yourself to scrutiny, maybe even backlash. Your heart races, your hands tremble. Silence, on the other hand, feels safe. It lets you stay invisible, untouchable. But that safety is an illusion, because inside, something corrodes. Think back to times you stayed quiet. Maybe you replay them in the dark, long after they've ended. The friend being mocked for their weight. The colleague passed over for a promotion because of who they love. The stranger harassed on the street. Your silence might have protected you in the moment, but afterward, didn't it haunt you? Didn't it feel like a stain you couldn't wash off? That's the price of complicity. your integrity, whispers that you've betrayed it. And the more often you stay silent, the easier it gets. The brain learns quickly that discomfort is to be avoided, so it files silence under survival, tells you it's prudent, wise, even mature. Eventually, you start believing that staying out of it is virtuous, that keeping the peace is the highest moral ground. But in truth, it's cowardice disguised as courtesy. There's another layer too. Silence doesn't just protect you from external conflict, it shields you from internal confrontation. If you never call out the cruelty around you, you don't have to examine how deeply it's tangled into your own beliefs. You never have to reckon with your biases, your smallness, your fears. Silence preserves the lie that you are guiltless, that by doing nothing, you are somehow clean. But you're not. None of us are, because every act of injustice needs bystanders to flourish. Systems of oppression are upheld not just by the loud and the violent, but by the quiet and the polite. Entire structures of harm lean on the shoulders of people who saw, who knew, and who said nothing. So next time you feel that familiar tightening in your chest, that prick of anxiety telling you to stay quiet, pause, ask yourself what your silence is really protecting. Your comfort, your image, or is it simply protecting the very harm you claim to oppose? Choosing to speak breaks the spell. It disrupts the comfortable conspiracy of silence. It might be awkward, it might be painful, it might cost you something, but complicity always costs more. It costs your self-respect. It costs your clarity. It costs the possibility of a better world, one small defiance at a time. And if you think one voice doesn't matter, remember that silence is never just yours alone. It's part of a chorus. When you refuse to add your note of quiet consent, you weaken that chorus. You make space for courage to echo instead. So be the interruption. Be the tension in the room. Because silence, left unchecked, doesn't just watch injustice, it invites it. But what happens when a simple misunderstanding does more damage than outright betrayal? What if the real tragedy is how easily connections crumble over things that were never even true? Have you ever noticed how easily a single misunderstanding can poison an entire relationship? It's almost terrifying how fragile human connections really are. How something as small as a misplaced word, a misunderstood look, or a wrong assumption can quietly unravel years of trust. One stray comment taken the wrong way can echo louder than 1,000 moments of genuine care. And worse, it rarely feels like an explosion. It's more like a slow, silent leak that empties everything you've built together without you even noticing, until one day there's nothing left but awkward silences and hollow courtesies. It starts small. Someone forgets to respond to a message, or they seem distant, distracted. You tell yourself it's nothing, but your mind doesn't let it go. It starts constructing stories. Maybe they're annoyed, maybe they're hiding something, maybe they've simply stopped caring. You don't check, you don't clarify, you let it fester, and in that dark, fertile soil, your imagination grows poisonous fruit. Then come the subtle shifts. You pull back slightly to protect yourself. They feel that pull and respond with their own retreat. Suddenly, your jokes don't land the same. The warmth is gone from your conversations, replaced by a polite chill. Neither of you wants to admit you're hurt. Neither of you wants to appear needy. So you both pretend it's fine, and in that mutual pretending, the real connection dies. Misunderstandings destroy connections not because people are cruel or careless, but because most of us are terrified of vulnerability. We'd rather nurse quiet suspicions than risk the raw discomfort of asking, Did I do something wrong? Are we okay? Our egos cling desperately to dignity, even at the expense of closeness, so we say nothing. And saying nothing becomes the wedge that drives us apart. It gets darker when misunderstandings harden into assumptions. You start interpreting everything they do through the distorted lens of your own fears. A slow reply means they're losing interest. A missed invitation means they don't value you. Their laughter with someone else feels like betrayal. All the while, they might be battling their own storms, stress, self-doubt, pain you know nothing about. But inside your head, the story is simpler. They've changed. Or maybe you were never that important to them at all. This is how trust corrodes, quietly, invisibly. And by the time you notice the rot, it feels irreversible. You don't reach out because you're certain they don't care. They don't reach out because they think you've moved on. Two people who once meant everything to each other become strangers by choice, each convinced the other stopped trying first. Think of how many friendships, romances, even family bonds have dissolved, not over great betrayals, but over small misunderstandings allowed to bloom unchecked. It's tragic, really. How often love dies, not from a dagger to the heart, but from 1,000 tiny cuts of miscommunication and unspoken fears. But here's the cruel irony: if either person had spoken up early, if they just said, "Hey, this is how I'm feeling," so much pain could have been spared. Vulnerability feels like weakness, but in reality, it's the only thing strong enough to mend the tiny fractures before they become irreparable breaks. Of course, sometimes misunderstandings reveal deeper incompatibilities, truths we've been avoiding. But more often, they're just illusions, phantoms conjured by our own insecurities, allowed to masquerade as reality because we were too afraid to shine a light on them. So many people wander through life carrying the silent grief of lost connections, replaying moments that could have gone differently, haunted by the simple conversations they never had. They'll say it was timing, or that people drift apart, or that things just change. And sometimes that's true. But often, it was just a misunderstanding, left to rot, to rewrite the story of what that relationship was and could have been. And it makes you wonder how many people are out there right now, just like you, missing someone they misunderstood. Quietly hurting, quietly resentful, both wishing the other would break the silence first. How many connections are dangling by a thread of pride, one that could be saved with a single moment of honest courage? Because sometimes it's not distance, betrayal, or fundamental differences that tear us apart. Sometimes it's simply our fear of being misunderstood again, or worse, of finding out we were never understood in the first place. And isn't it unsettling to realize that right now, even this second, your own minor worries might be quietly transforming into obsessions that will poison your peace far more than any real enemy ever could? Imagine a small thought, a minor concern, one of those harmless anxieties that dances at the edges of your mind. Maybe it's the suspicion that a coworker doesn't really like you, or the uneasy feeling that a passing stranger gave you a strange look. Tiny, barely worth mentioning. But you do mention it to yourself, just enough to plant a seed. And once planted, it grows. At first, it's easy to dismiss. You go about your day, laugh at jokes, get lost in your phone, but the seed waits. It lurks because small worries are patient. They know how to slip beneath your skin, how to find the cracks in your calm. Then, when your guard is down, maybe in the shower or right before sleep, it stirs. It reminds you it's still there, still unresolved. Your mind, forever hungry for patterns, begins to scan for evidence. You start replaying old conversations, searching facial expressions for hidden meaning. That awkward smile from your friend, was that pity? Was that contempt? Each replay makes it sharper, more vivid, more sinister. Soon your brain isn't just recalling memories, it's rewriting them to fit the narrative your worry demands. It escalates in small, invisible steps. You begin noticing moments that would have once passed unnoticed. A delayed text response feels loaded with hidden rejection. A harmless inside joke suddenly cuts too close. Your minor worry mutates into a filter through which you view the entire world, and every new interaction becomes raw material for its dark architecture. The most dangerous part? Your mind rewards this process. Each obsessive loop gives you a fleeting sense of control. By overanalyzing, by turning these moments over and over, you convince yourself you're staying ahead of some lurking threat, that you're protecting yourself from humiliation, betrayal, heartbreak. But really, you're feeding the very beast that consumes you. As days pass, your worry deepens its roots. What was once a whisper becomes a constant companion. It follows you into work, shadows you at parties, sits beside you in bed, and it's clever. It learns to mimic reason. It will tell you that you're being prudent, realistic, cautious, that paying attention to these tiny signs is how you avoid disaster. And because you mistake vigilance for wisdom, you keep feeding it. But obsession has a price. It steals your joy. It makes genuine moments of connection feel suspicious, hollow. A compliment becomes suspicious. Flattery. A friend's busy week turns into proof they're slipping away. You live in anticipation of disaster, rehearsing pain so often that even if nothing bad ever happens, you've already suffered 1,000 heartbreaks in your imagination. Think of how absurd this is. You spend hours dissecting a harmless glance, a casual remark, constructing elaborate stories of hidden motives and silent judgments. Meanwhile, real life passes by unnoticed, beautiful, messy, imperfect life, lost because your mind is too busy nursing phantom wounds. And here's the cruelest twist: these obsessions can become self-fulfilling. Your guardedness, your constant second-guessing, your subtle defensiveness, they ripple outward. People sense it, even if they can't name it. Relationships strain under the weight of your unspoken suspicions. In trying so desperately to protect yourself, you create the very loneliness you feared. This is how minor worries grow into obsessions. Not through sudden leaps, but by countless tiny concessions. Each time you give your anxious thought a little attention, you reinforce it. Each time you replay that awkward moment, you etch it deeper into your mind. Until one day, it's not just a thought, it's part of who you are. So next time you feel that small worry tugging at your sleeve, pause. Examine it. Ask if it truly deserves the energy it demands. Most won't. Most are fragile things that shrivel in the light of honest scrutiny. But if you nurture them, if you coddle them with endless rumination, they will grow, they will flourish, and they will remake your world in their anxious image. Now imagine what happens when the mind, already tangled in obsessions, decides that hope itself must be dimmed to preserve its fragile sense of stability. Picture a tiny ember floating in the darkness. It glows fragile but alive, a promise of warmth, of light, of something better. That's hope. And in many ways, hope is the most powerful tool your mind possesses. It pushes you through hardship, convinces you to try again, to risk, to grow. But what happens when hope itself becomes dangerous, when it threatens the delicate balance of your mental world? That's when your mind dims it, quietly, almost lovingly, to protect something even more precious: stability. Think of how many dreams you once carried that now lie abandoned in the corners of your mind. The novel you were sure you'd write, the places you vowed to travel, The life you pictured at 16, bright and boundless. They're still there, ghostly reminders. But they don't burn like they used to. Over time, your mind muffles their glow, tucks them away where they can't disrupt the rhythm of your daily life. It feels like forgetting. It feels like maturity. Really, it's your psyche safeguarding you from chaos. Because unchecked hope is volatile. It sparks dissatisfaction, restlessness, revolt. It whispers that you deserve more, that your current reality is insufficient, that comfort is a trap. And if you listen too closely, hope might lead you to tear down the carefully constructed routines that keep you functioning. So, your mind intervenes. It blurs the edges of your most ambitious visions, dulls the ache of your unmet desires, so you can keep moving through familiar corridors without risking collapse. Look at how this plays out with people stuck in unfulfilling jobs. In the beginning, they hope for promotions, for recognition, for escape into work that feels meaningful. But year after year, that hope is whittled down. They stop imagining different futures. They stop looking at job boards or dreaming of passion projects. The hope that once made them ache for change dims to a low, barely perceptible hum. Why? Because holding on to that hope would mean enduring the daily torment of disappointment. Letting it go means stability. Numb, perhaps, but steady. Or consider relationships. Maybe you once hoped for deep, consuming love. A connection that felt fated, electric, undeniable. But after enough betrayals or quiet disappointments, that hope fades. You start telling yourself that companionship is enough, that affection is a luxury you can live without. You rewrite the script in your mind. What matters is loyalty, routine, shared responsibilities. The hope for something transcendent is gently extinguished because it threatened to unravel the fragile fabric of your acceptance. This isn't always sinister. Sometimes it's merciful. Hope can be a cruel engine when reality stands no chance of catching up. For someone trapped by poverty, by illness, by systemic barriers that promise only repetition of the same grim patterns, relentless hope is agony. Their mind tempers it, dims it, offers resignation in its place. Not because they lack courage, but because endless hope in the face of immovable obstacles is a recipe for despair. But there's a darker side. Systems of power understand this mechanism intimately. Societies, corporations, entire economic structures depend on you not hoping too brightly, not yearning too dangerously. They thrive on a populace that settles, that believes small comforts are the pinnacle of life, that swallows the story that stability itself is the highest good, even if it comes at the price of abandoned dreams. It's easier to maintain order when people accept dull certainty over vibrant possibility. So your mind, in collaboration with the quiet pressures of the world around you, often conspires to dim hope, not extinguish it entirely. That would be too obvious, too bleak. Just enough to keep you showing up, paying bills, keeping routines, not tearing at the seams of a predictable existence. Yet there's a tragedy here, subtle but immense. Because while hope can indeed be destabilizing, it's also the spark of all growth, all rebellion, all transcendence. When you allow it to fade too much, you might preserve your stability, but you also calcify. You stop evolving. You trade the risk of heartbreak for the certainty of stagnation. Your world becomes smaller, safer, dimmer, and maybe somewhere inside you feel this loss. A quiet mourning for all the unlived lives, all the unexplored paths. A flicker of grief for the person you might have become if you dared to keep hoping, even when it was dangerous. But why do we so easily accept this dimming? Why do we let our minds tuck our brightest ambitions into the shadows? Maybe because familiarity feels safer than fire. Maybe because the promise of stability is the most seductive comfort of all. Of course, the question that gnaws at the edges of this realization is chilling in its simplicity. If your mind willingly dims your hope to keep you stable, what other illusions is it maintaining to protect the life you think you've chosen? And that leads perfectly into what comes next, because sometimes the most powerful changes are completely invisible, hiding behind a mask of comforting sameness. Have you ever walked through the same neighborhood, day after day, year after year, only to suddenly realize one morning that it's completely transformed? New buildings stand where old ones crumbled, unfamiliar faces replace neighbors you once knew by name, and somehow even the air feels different. But you didn't notice it happening, did you? Because familiarity has a way of blinding you to true change. It comforts you, wraps around your senses like a warm blanket, and quietly dulls your perception until the shocking becomes ordinary without your ever consenting to it. This is the trap. Familiarity doesn't just breed complacency, it breeds illusion. Your mind is wired to conserve energy, to lean on habits, to create shortcuts. When you see the same streets, the same faces, hear the same voices, your brain stops paying attention to the details. It shifts into autopilot, assuring you that nothing important is different, that you're safe, that your world remains stable. Meanwhile, reality is shifting beneath your feet. Think about your closest relationships. Maybe there was a time they sparked joy, curiosity, even a thrilling kind of unpredictability. Over time, though, routines took hold. Arguments were swept under rugs, red flags turned into faded decor. You convinced yourself everything was fine because it felt familiar, because the alternative, acknowledging how far things had drifted, was too uncomfortable to confront. You trusted the rhythm of routine more than the evidence of your own eyes. Familiarity shields you from noticing how people change too. The friend who becomes more self-absorbed, the partner whose warmth subtly drains away, the family member whose bitterness grows sharper. You tell yourself they're the same as they always were, because the pattern of their presence hasn't broken. It's easier that way, less disruptive. Familiarity becomes a cushion against painful realizations, but it also keeps you anchored to situations that may no longer serve you, situations that might even harm you. And what about yourself? When was the last time you truly examined who you've become? Familiarity with your own thoughts, your own habits, your own flaws creates a sort of blind spot. You assume you're largely unchanged because each day you wake up in the same skin, hear the same voice echo in your mind. Yet, over years, subtle shifts accumulate. Your dreams shrink, your resilience frays, your convictions soften. By the time you notice, you might not recognize who you are anymore. This isn't just personal, it's cultural, societal. Look at the systems you live under. Corruption, inequality, erosion of freedoms, these don't erupt overnight. They creep in gradually, normalizing themselves through slow encroachment, until what would have once sparked outrage now draws only a weary sigh. Familiarity dulls your outrage. It teaches you to accept each incremental injustice as part of the natural order. And by the time true change reveals itself, it's already too late to fight it without enormous cost. Think about how your environment exploits this. Marketing, politics, even the design of your neighborhood or city, each uses repetition, consistent symbols, and carefully maintained images to make sure things feel stable. Familiar logos, familiar slogans, familiar narratives, they lull you. They build a sense of trust, even when what's behind them has drastically shifted. You buy the same products, vote the same way, support the same institutions, blind to how radically their substance has changed. Familiarity also rewrites your memories. It stitches comforting narratives from threads of routine, sanding down the edges of past traumas, smoothing over the cracks where warning signs once were. You start to question if things were ever different. Were you really unhappy back then, or are you just overthinking now? Familiarity convinces you that nothing is wrong, that everything is just as it should be, even when your gut screams otherwise. And there's a darker side, because if familiarity hides true change, it also hides true decay. You might stay in a job that slowly siphons your spirit, in a city that grows more hostile by the day, in a relationship that quietly withers because it all still looks the same on the surface. You cling to the familiar, not because it's good, but because it's known. The unknown terrifies you more than slow destruction. So you remain. You convince yourself the small sacrifices don't matter, that the slow encroachments on your peace are trivial. Until one day you wake up, and everything you valued is gone, replaced by something unrecognizable that grew there while you were busy finding comfort in repetition. Recognizing this is uncomfortable. It requires brutal honesty, a willingness to look past the soothing lies familiarity offers and see what has truly transformed. It means examining your relationships, your surroundings, even yourself, with fresh eyes and a suspicious mind. It means understanding that just because something feels stable doesn't mean it hasn't shifted in fundamental, possibly damaging ways. Because ultimately, familiarity is a clever mask. It assures you that you know the story, that the characters haven't changed, that the plot is the same. But lift the mask, and you may find a stranger staring back, a life, a world, even a self you no longer recognize. And that realization, as painful as it is also the only starting point for genuine awareness and meaningful choice. So ask yourself, what might you be failing to see right now, simply because it's always been there?